was born March 18, 1980, at Torrance Memorial Hospital, and right from the start, she was the center of attention because she had to fight to survive. Due to a hole in her diaphragm, she had to undergo multiple surgeries. She was only given a 20% chance of survival, and miraculously, she not only survived, but she thrived. Friends and family of Desmond knew her as a smart, self-confident young woman, unafraid to express her opinion, who was energetic and full of affection for those she cared about, who were many. Desmond graduated from North Torrance High School and earned a master's degree in criminal justice from Long Beach State. Unsure of her calling in life, she changed her mind and decided to become a teacher. Her goal was to teach autistic children. A week after her death, a notice came in the mail that she had earned her teaching credential. She was loved by many and friends to all. She was sweet at times but could be tough as nails. She could command a bar full of patrons when she wanted, and all the while be singing one of her favorite karaoke songs such as Black Velvet or These Boots Were Made for Walking, and once again, being the center of attention. It was that secondary family that Corey acquired while working in those various establishments that kept her going back despite what her family wanted her to do. In 2009, Corey worked in a bar. On Saturday, February 14th, she had a shift that ended at 9:30 p.m. She then walked 2 blocks to the popular Bar Street Lounge. Many employees of this bar knew Corey, as she had friends working there. She was caught on surveillance cameras helping her friends at the bar. She left there only after closing, around 2 a.m. None of her friends saw her after that. On Monday, February 16th, at approximately 2:20 p.m., the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office received a terrifying call. About 100 miles from the bar where people last saw Corey, the driver stopped to take snow chains off the wheels. The man felt a strong, unpleasant smell as soon as he exited the car. He thought the source of the stench was an animal that got hit by a car, but still decided to check. Not far from the car, he found something strange. He saw a black plastic garbage bag with a woman's body inside. The man ran out into the road in a panic, stopping cars and asking to call the police, as his phone's battery was dead. They identified the victim by fingerprints and driver's license. It was 28-year-old Corey Daddy Desmond. Subjected to a brutal attack, the woman died from strangulation. She had a lot of bruises on her face and neck and injuries to the back of her head. Corey tried to fight back, as she had several defense wounds. Although unable to determine the exact time of death, the medical experts said Corey was on the street for about 36 hours before the man found her. Corey's pants were unbuttoned and pulled to her knees, but no signs of intimate contact were found. The first conclusion that investigators came to was that the place where the driver found Corey's body was not the place of her death. The criminal left her body by the side of the road, hoping it would take time to find it. Before the man found her body, the rain destroyed all possible evidence. Reporting bad news to the families of the dead or missing is perhaps the hardest thing in the work of a policeman. At that time, Corey was living with her grandmother. The news about the granddaughter's body found in a garbage bag shocked the woman. And this news was no less devastating for Mark, Corey's father. Mark knew perfectly well how the system worked. Sometimes the police delay the investigation for many months because they need a warrant to conduct searches, interrogations, and fingerprinting. There are cases when the time-consuming bureaucracy slows down the process of solving a crime. Therefore, Mark decided not to sit and wait for the police to find the person who deprived him of his daughter. He decided to act. He said love for his daughter gave him the strength to look for the criminal. Mark found Corey's Jeep Wrangler in an alley next to the bar where she worked. He also discovered that Corey disappeared on the night of February 15th, but unfortunately, no one knew about it. Grandma did not panic because Corey was already an adult and could stay overnight with a friend or friends. In addition, she often worked late into the night and came home when her grandmother was already asleep. Investigators went to the bar where Desmond worked to find possible witnesses or leads. They talked to other employees and learned that Corey finished her shift at 9:30 p.m. and then went to another bar. She often did that. Her friends worked at that bar, and Corey often visited them at the end of her shift. She helped at the bar or chatted with friends while sitting at the counter. Besides, It brought her extra tips. Bar visitors knew her face well, and many perceived Corey as another employee. Surveillance cameras confirmed the words of the visitors. They captured the girl helping her friends at the bar. Unfortunately, a bartender's job is not only to pour drinks and entertain the interlocutors. Sometimes, after drinking alcohol, some people stop controlling their emotions and their behavior becomes inappropriate. That evening, Corey was unlucky enough to meet such a person. According to eyewitnesses, she argued with some man who behaved provocatively. He bothered women and unceremoniously touched them, making unflattering compliments. While everyone was silent and did not dare to put this man in his place, Corey stood up for the bar's visitors. In other words, the girl explained to the man that he was not welcome there. The violent guest was furious, but still agreed to leave. Corey continued to help her friends and made drinks at the bar as if nothing had happened. That evening, she consumed alcohol, but it did not affect her behavior. After 2 a.m., she left the bar alone and planned to go home. But as we now know, a man found Corey's lifeless body 100 miles from the bar the next day. Mark gave the police all the information he could find. Through television, he appealed to everyone to report any crucial information for the investigation. Meanwhile, the police identified the man Corey quarreled with before her death. During a conversation with investigators, the man said he did not know who Corey Desmond was. However, he did not deny having a big fight with the girl in a bar on February 14th. The man said alcohol made him uncontrollable, confirming that they kicked him out of the bar. Right after that, he went home to sleep. The suspect denied any involvement in the crime. He agreed to take a polygraph test and let the police search his house and car. They carefully examined the suspect's car. After all, there could have been traces like bloodstains, hair, or something belonging to Corey. The car was dirty both inside and outside, and yet forensic experts did not find any evidence there. While searching the man's house, they found nothing indicating his involvement in the crime. The last hope of the investigators to catch the man in a lie was a polygraph test, but the man passed it without much difficulty, answering all the questions of the police. In addition, his wife confirmed that he came home before 2 a.m. and immediately went to bed. Corey left the bar around 2 a.m., which means this man was not involved in her death. Thus, the police excluded him from the list of suspects, but the problem was that they had no other persons of interest in this investigation. They studied Corey's personal life, trying to find out if she had enemies who could wish her harm. Investigators found out another strange detail. The owner of the bar where Corey worked said that that night, she came and asked for permission to use the toilet. But since the bar was closed, he refused the girl's request and advised her to go home. It was about 2:20 in the morning. What happened next remained a mystery because Corey never got in the car and did not go home. Investigators assumed that she had been abducted or assaulted near her place of work. However, the bar's surveillance cameras did not record this, and there were no witnesses on the street at such a late hour. At the time of Corey's death, her blood alcohol content was more than 4 times the legal limit for driving. It was unclear whether she planned to use her car or was looking for other ways to get home. Unfortunately, she did not meet anyone who would help her that night. A month later, the investigation reached a dead end. The police checked all the versions and clues but found no new suspects. Corey's father, Mark, wasn't going to give up. He rented 3 billboards on Artesia Boulevard in Redondo Beach. The billboards contained a photo of his daughter with the question, "Who killed Corey Day Desmond?" The man offered a $15,000 reward for any information helpful to the police. "I'm going to keep them up there to let people know the guy is still out there," Mark Desmond said. "Maybe it will save somebody." To some extent, this story is similar to the one of Alexandra Kemp. The latter's father, Roger, did everything to find the criminal, and billboards played a crucial role in solving the crime. If you haven't watched this story yet, click on the link at the end of this video. Information about Corey periodically appeared on 50 electronic billboards. Eventually, it brought results. In May 2009, the phone rang at the police station. A woman named Tiffany Ware saw one of the billboards with a photo of Corey. Thanks to this woman, the police were able to solve this case. Tiffany spoke very quietly. The woman was experiencing stress and severe fright. She rambled as if she didn't know where to start. Then she finally focused and said, "Hello, my name is Tiffany. I think my boyfriend Tony Lopez Perez killed that bartender girl Corey Day Desmond. Please check him. He's behaving strangely, but I'll tell you more when we meet." Tiffany called several times to arrange a meeting with the detective. During their conversation in the park, the woman told him about her suspicions. According to her, on February 14th, she and Tony planned a romantic Valentine's Day dinner. She spent the whole evening preparing for a date. Tiffany took the children to their grandparents, visited a beauty salon, and bought a new red dress. Tony loved it when she wore red clothes. It drove him crazy. The guy was working that day, but had to return home around 11:30 p.m. Tiffany waited for Tony almost all night. The woman tried to contact him, but he did not answer calls and messages. Tony returned home at 4:30 in the morning and, as if nothing had happened, said he was too drunk to go home. He said he fell asleep in his car. Tiffany mentioned that Tony rarely cleaned the interior of his car. However, after a few days, he bought a whole set of cleaning products. He washed the car thoroughly, not letting her help. The guy's behavior seemed strange, but at that moment, she did not attach much importance to it. A few days later, Tony sold his white Dodge for almost nothing and bought another car. He also changed his phone number for no apparent reason. A little later, they had a joint trip to Big Bear Lake. They chatted along the way, and everything seemed normal, until Tony suddenly stopped the car on the side of the road. He turned to Tiffany and asked her, "Do you think this dead girl, what was her name, the bartender, was dumped here? I'm almost 100% sure that the police found her body here." Tony Lopez Perez and Tiffany Ware lived together for about 4 years. They had a 6-year-old son together, but they never married. He was a hard-working man and got along well with everyone. He has never had any problems with the law. Perez came from a large family with 8 siblings. His parents grew up in the LA area, and Perez attended high school in Manhattan Beach. Tony's absence on the day of Corey's death, cleaning the car and urgently selling it, a strange trip, and an equally strange comment about where the police found her body, a change of phone number, and odd behavior. Putting all these facts together, Tiffany realized that Tony could be the one who took the life of Corey Desmond. She didn't want to believe it. The investigators decided to talk to Tony and went to his house. To prevent him from suspecting anything, Tiffany agreed to play along with the police, not telling him anything about this conversation. It looked as if they were conducting a routine interview of people to find witnesses in the Corey Desmond case. Tony looked calm, like a person with nothing to hide. He wasn't nervous while answering all the questions. He said he didn't know her, mentioning he had only seen Corey in the newspapers. However, to arrest Tony Lopez Perez for taking the life of Corey, they needed hard evidence. Thus, the police found the new owner of the Dodge that Tony sold shortly after the news of Corey's death. The new owner confirmed that Tony sold him his car for a low price. He allowed the police to check the vehicle for any evidence. Tiffany said Tony cleaned the interior thoroughly before selling his car. However, when the experts applied luminol and used an ultraviolet lamp, it became evident why Tony Lopez Perez got rid of his car. The interior of the car lit up in bright blue. The police asked Tony to come to the police station. They didn't tell him anything about the find, so he wouldn't run away. At first, he claimed he had never seen Corey, but later changed his testimony, saying he saw her near the bar and whistled at her. As soon as the police noticed that the man was changing his testimony, they showed him photos of the car he had sold and said that they had found crucial evidence there. This time, Tony claimed to have seen Corey outside the bar. Standing under a street lamp, she suddenly lost consciousness and fell on the sidewalk. He tried to help her, but she did not regain consciousness. Then he started slapping Corey on the cheeks. Corey opened her eyes and started screaming. She told him to get out and asked him to let her go. According to Tony, he got scared, put his hands over her mouth, and accidentally strangled her. Fearing he would get blamed for Corey's death, he put her body in the back seat of his car and drove home. Perez said he woke up during the night and went outside to see if it was a nightmare. "I opened the door and it was not a nightmare," Perez told detectives. "It was true." Perez said he went back inside and tried to get some sleep. In the morning, he went to work with Desmond's body still in the back seat. At the end of the working day, he placed her body in 2 garbage bags, took it to a remote area, and left it next to the side of the road. According to Tony's story, what he did to Corey was an accident. He claimed that he was drunk and scared. He accidentally strangled her in a state of panic, but Corey's injuries suggested otherwise. She had severe injuries on the back of her head, bruises on her face and neck, and defense wounds on her hands. Moreover, Corey's pants were down to her knees. Tony Perez was arrested and charged with first-degree deprivation of life. The next day, he showed the police where he dumped Corey's body. In addition to Tony's confession, they now had the results of DNA tests. Corey's blood matched the blood found in the car that Tony sold immediately after committing the crime. At the 2011 trial, Coroner Jack Sheridan testified to the multiple contusions to the victim's head, the evidence of strangulation, and the blunt force trauma to her face. Sheridan also said she had scratches on her body that suggested the criminal dragged her after her death. Based on Corey's injuries, prosecutors said Perez assaulted her and tried to force her into intimacy in the early morning of February 15, 2009. Corey resisted. Unable to get what he wanted, Perez strangled her. Tiffany Ware testified during the trial. She told the San Bernardino County jury that her former boyfriend, Tony Lopez Perez, had an insatiable appetite for sex in January and February 2009. Even though they were making love almost every day, Ware said Perez was still not satisfied. Tiffany also told the court that Tony had twice engaged in intimacy with her against her will. It happened after the birth of their son and with an interval of about a month. Both incidents occurred when she was fast asleep on the couch after taking painkillers due to severe back pain. Perez, who chose not to testify at the trial, made his first statements to the court during his sentencing. He said he was taught to love and respect those around him, but that he veered off course at times. "I forgot the key lessons I was taught about in life, which make me a man, a father, a loving uncle to many, and a responsible person who supports his family that I so love," Perez said. "In the end, I fell short." He generally stuck to the story his attorney Andrew Hanel presented at the trial, that he was scared and didn't mean to hurt Desmond. Hanel argued to a jury of 6 men and 6 women that Perez found her passed out on the sidewalk. He said he tried to calm her down and didn't mean to kill her. "I should have thought before acting," Perez said. "I should have stepped back and cleared my head. Fear took over. I was so scared, so careless." Corey's father, Mark Desmond, said his daughter had a beautiful future ahead of her before her life was cut short at the age of 28. Tony Perez should live the rest of his miserable life knowing he killed his own children's hopes and dreams at the same time he was killing Corey, her father said. He embodies all the characteristics that women in society fear. Just before sentencing, Perez asked God and the court to show him mercy. "My very deepest apologies to the Desmond family and to my own family. I have brought such hurt and sorrow to the Desmonds that will forever shape their life. I hope he never gets out in the street again," said Desmond's grandmother, Beverly. "I hope he suffers as much as she suffered." In July 2011, a jury of 6 men and 6 women found 36-year-old Tony Lopez Perez guilty of first-degree deprivation of life. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 25 years. Corey Desmond's family expressed gratitude to Tiffany Ware, thanks to whom the police solved this case. "If it hadn't been for her, I don't think they would have ever found out it was him," said Leslie Schwab, a family friend who attended every day of the trial, along with about a dozen others in San Bernardino County. On June 1, 2011, the Waller family's life took a turn. A woman named Jackie contacted her sister Cheryl, informing her that she was going to pick up her children from her ex-husband, Clay. Jackie planned to return home later that day. However, she never came back, nor did she make any further contact. Worried and unable to reach Jackie, Cheryl became increasingly anxious. By around 7 p.m., Cheryl decided to drive to the police station. Here, she made a startling statement. Cheryl claimed that Clay Waller had killed her sister. The police officers found this accusation shocking, since Jackie had only called a few hours earlier, and there hadn't been any immediate cause for concern or reason to believe she was in danger at that time. Despite the unusual nature of Cheryl's assertion, it eventually became apparent that her instincts were correct. Jackie was indeed entangled in a troubling situation. So, what exactly happened to Jackie? And why was Cheryl so convinced her sister had been murdered by her ex-husband, even before Jackie was declared missing? Jackie was known for being sweet, kind, and caring. When she met Clay, there was an instant connection between them. Clay had a speech impediment that had subjected him to ridicule by others. This made him feel awkward and uncomfortable in social situations. However, unlike others, Jackie didn't ridicule him. Instead, she defended him and ensured he wasn't hurt by people's unkind remarks. Jackie's nature was all about protecting the vulnerable, fighting injustice, and helping everyone around her. It wasn't long before their bond grew stronger and they got married. At the time of their marriage, both were about 30 years old and aspired to have a large family. They bought a small house in Sanguine View, Missouri, where Jackie began creating a family nest. She had a successful career. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said about Clay. His life consisted of numerous failures, and he struggled with holding down any job for long periods. As a result, Jackie became the primary breadwinner of the family. She always dreamed of having children, but faced challenges in conceiving naturally. Determined to become a mother, though, she underwent fertility treatments, commonly referred to as ECO. So when Jackie discovered she was pregnant, with triplets no less, her joy knew no bounds. The family included 2 girls, Abby and Addison, plus 1 boy, Maddox. It was incredibly challenging for the woman to care for 3 children at once. Nonetheless, she did not complain. She continued to shoulder all responsibilities by herself, without relying on her husband. He seemed uninterested in the children. At that time, Clay took a job with the sheriff's office to support the family while his wife cared for the children. However, he didn't stay long. He was fired after a year. Only Jackie's parents and sister provided assistance with the children, allowing her some respite. When Clay lost his job, Jackie took on work to support the entire family. Even after their children were born, Clay did not change his behavior and showed little interest in either his family or work. Occasionally, he engaged in part-time work that didn't bring in the expected income. Clay seemed comfortable living off his wife's hard work. She worked 40 hours a week and managed the household simultaneously. Jackie's career progressed rapidly. She soon secured a management position at an insurance company branch. This advancement further relaxed Clay's attitude toward financial responsibility. Instead of appreciating his wife's efforts, Clay mistreated her in various ways. He insulted her frequently, called her worthless, and demeaned her value by stating no one wanted her. His infidelities and abusive actions caused significant distress. Jackie's parents and sister were deeply troubled by Clay's behavior and urged her to divorce him. However, Jackie was reluctant to take such a drastic step at that time and tried to salvage their marriage. Every day brought diminishing hope that their relationship could be saved. Over the next few years, financial difficulties compounded their problems because Clay was not working while Jackie's salary could no longer cover all expenses for their large family. Mounting mortgage debts led to their house being foreclosed upon. The woman decided it was time to move in with sister, seizing upon the opportunity. Her husband then relocated to a friend's place. At this point, their children were a bit older. Jackie faced the tough, yet necessary choice to file for divorce. She believed she and her kids deserved a better life. When Jackie brought this up with her husband, Clay seemed calm initially. However, he soon changed his stance and refused the divorce. His threats started subtly, but gradually escalated into direct threats against her life. He warned that divorcing him would be like signing a death warrant for herself and their children. These threats terrified Jackie, yet she remained resolute. Living under such conditions was no longer an option for her, so she sought ways to end her marriage with Clay. She turned to her family, sharing the troubling behaviors of her husband, and began keeping a diary to document his actions. Jackie also noticed that Clay was stalking her. For the sake of safety, she and her children moved in with her sister during this period. Her kids were only 5 years old and didn't understand the situation fully. Nonetheless, Jackie explained that their current living arrangement was crucial. Time passed, and things began to stabilize as the divorce process neared its conclusion. It appeared that Clay had come to terms with their separation and ceased his harassment towards Jackie. They even started forming new relationships on the side. Jackie allowed Clay visitation rights with their children, and disputes between them reduced significantly. On June 1, 2011, Clay and Jackie agreed to meet at the attorney's office to finalize the last aspects of their divorce. On that day, their son Maddox was visiting his father, while Jackie's other children stayed with Cheryl, Jackie's sister. After the meeting at the attorney's office, Jackie planned to pick up Maddox from Clay's house before heading back to Cheryl's place. Leaving the office, Jackie telephoned her sister Cheryl to report that everything had gone smoothly and mentioned she was on her way to collect Maddox from Clay's residence before returning home. That conversation would be their last. Jackie gradually lost touch. As time passed, her sister became increasingly anxious and started calling Jackie, but there was no answer. She then tried calling Clay, but he didn't respond either. Cheryl began to suspect that Clay had done something to Jackie. She sent him a text message. "If I don't hear from Jackie in 5 minutes, I'm going to the police." Almost immediately, Clay called back asking what was wrong. Cheryl responded firmly, stating that she believed he knew exactly what was happening. Clay asserted he didn't know where Jackie was and mentioned he would instruct her to call Cheryl when he saw her. However, Cheryl wasn't convinced. She took her sister's children to their parents' house and filed a police report personally. Despite initial skepticism about Clay's involvement in Jackie's disappearance, the detectives took her concerns seriously. They didn't make her wait for 24 hours before investigating further. Instead, they proceeded to contact Jackie's ex-husband for any leads on her whereabouts. When questioned, 41-year-old Clay informed them that he had lunch with Jackie. They subsequently went to the attorney's office to discuss some aspects of their divorce, and then drove together to his house for further discussions. He claimed that after chatting for a while, he left for the store. Upon his return, Jackie's car was gone. He assumed she had departed. Clay added that his son Maddox was in Illinois with his new girlfriend at the time, and insisted Jackie was aware of it. According to him, Jackie wasn't there for her son, but merely to talk about other matters with Clay. However, Cheryl found his statements implausible and inconsistent with what she knew. Jackie made it known that her visit to Clay's house was solely for seeing her son. She had no intention of discussing anything else with him, especially given that she wouldn't have allowed her son to be far away with another woman. Noting these discrepancies, Cheryl managed to convince the investigators that Clay's account lacked credibility and suggested he might be concealing crucial information about Jackie's disappearance. In light of this new perspective provided by Cheryl, investigators were now treating the case more urgently, as both the missing person and her car remained unaccounted for. A comprehensive search was launched for Jackie a few hours after her disappearance. Investigators her Honda Pilot on an interstate highway with a flat tire, but there were no signs of an accident. The tire appeared punctured intentionally, making the scene look staged. The car was open and empty, with a few bloodstains on the back seat, but no other clues indicating her whereabouts. These disturbing details hinted at a possible attack and kidnapping. The search effort for Jackie was concentrated in the vicinity where her car was found. Numerous volunteers, including police officers, rescue squads with dogs, and family members, participated in the search. They came from various parts of the region, responding to requests from Jackie's relatives. Despite the unbearable heat, many were willing to help locate her. Jackie's family announced a reward of $3,500 for information about her whereabouts. Despite their efforts, including extensive searches and public appeals for assistance, the search yielded no results for several days. Police began to scrutinize Clay, Jackie's ex-husband, more closely. When they visited his house to speak with him again, he recounted the same story as before, but refused access to his home and car. He promptly hired a lawyer who asserted his rights. 4 days after Jackie's disappearance, Clay left her a voicemail with a distressed tone. "Hi honey, it's Sunday. You went missing on Wednesday. Please call me if you get this message. I don't know where you are, and I miss you very much." Detectives later obtained a search warrant and returned to Clay's residence for a thorough inspection. During this inspection, they discovered blood-like stains in his vehicle. Forensic analysis revealed it was fish blood. Clay had deliberately coated the car with fish blood and recorded it on video as a test for forensic experts. In addition to examining the vehicle, investigators noted conspicuous details in Clay's house. A section of carpet had been removed from the floor, leaving an obvious mark. Tiny drops of blood were also found on the walls of the hallway leading to the basement. These findings raised further questions about Clay's involvement and intentions regarding Jackie's disappearance. Traces of furniture rearrangement were evident, signaling that something unusual was happening in the house. Forensics examined under the floorboards and discovered a bloody carpet. Blood samples from the house and the carpet were sent to the laboratory for further examination. Detectives tracked the missing woman's last known movements to 1:10 a.m. She was observed at a drugstore with her ex-husband. The pair appeared composed and normal. Approximately 2 hours later, she was seen at an ATM withdrawing money. After that, Jackie did not reappear on CCTV, although Clay was seen a few hours later with his son and new girlfriend at a toy store. Subsequently, they visited a car wash in their pickup truck, which had a suspicious trash can inside. By then, Clay had changed clothes and meticulously washed both the car and the boat. This increased suspicion around him, establishing him as the prime suspect. Investigators released photos of Clay's pickup truck and boat, requesting eyewitnesses who may have seen them. A young couple reported seeing Clay near Devil's Island on the Mississippi River in response to this request. Detectives confirmed this information through an analysis of Clay's cell phone billing records, prompting them to focus search efforts in that area. Despite numerous searches over the large terrain, nothing surfaced directly linking to the missing woman. The forensic results soon arrived, indicating that the drops of blood found in Clay's house indeed belonged to Jackie. The police then operated under the assumption that Jackie was deceased. Detectives called Clay in for questioning and attempted to procure a confession from him regarding Jackie's murder. However, Clay denied all accusations, stating that the bloodstains were remnants of an old domestic incident in his kitchen. Without physical remains or definitive proof of death, investigators lacked grounds to arrest or charge him. Despite releasing him from custody, authorities kept Clay under close surveillance and continued their investigation. Being an ex-deputy sheriff himself, Clay knew they were monitoring him closely and engaged in deceptive maneuvers to elude detection, effectively playing cat and mouse with law enforcement officials. He'd go to deserted vacant lots to mislead the investigation, while the entire neighborhood stood by and participated in the search for the missing mother of three. Clay continued to bully and taunt them. He would drive past the search party or Jackie's family, insult them, give them the middle finger, and shout that they were wasting their time and wouldn't find anything. His defiant behavior raised more suspicions and questions. Meanwhile, the missing woman's sister Cheryl fought in court for custody of the triplets. She feared the children would go to a father who was a danger. His erratic behavior backfired on him, and Cheryl got custody. This enraged him, and he began threatening his ex-wife's sister with violence, including writing about it on social media. The woman recorded these threats and contacted police. Detectives seized the opportunity and arrested Clay nearly 5 months after Jackie's disappearance. He was charged with threats to life, which he accepted, but claimed he wrote out of anger and despair at losing custody of his beloved children. Clay insisted he didn't plan anything bad against Cheryl. He viewed himself as a victim in this situation. While investigating this incident with his sister, police found out he had other charges pending against him: stealing $50,000 from a previous employer, as well as stalking a man. Detectives pressed his former co-worker, hoping Clay would confess to killing his ex-wife and lead them to her body, but it was futile. Clayton continued to deny all charges regarding Jackie's disappearance. Instead of confessing to the crime, he started claiming confidently that he knew who was behind his ex-wife's death, a man named Harry, but detectives had already checked this lead thoroughly. Harry had an ironclad alibi that eliminated him from suspicion. All evidence pointed only to Clay, yet he kept denying it. He ended up going to prison for 5 years for threatening Cheryl. While the police locked him up in jail, they continued to investigate Jackie's disappearance. The search for the missing woman continued on Devil's Island, but never yielded any results. Eventually, about 2 years after Jackie's disappearance, the cops gathered a lot of circumstantial evidence, video camera footage, blood in his house, and more. They decided to charge Clay with his ex-wife's murder, even without her body. It was a risky and desperate move because if they lost, the prosecutor's office would not be able to charge him a second time. However, the prosecutor was determined. After consulting with his accomplices, Clay concluded that it would be best for them to make a deal with the prosecution to reduce the sentence. To do so, the defendant offered to plead guilty to the murder and provide the location of the body. Jackie's family agreed to this deal because it was important to give her a decent burial. Clay led police officers to his ex-wife's body. It was in a secluded spot on a remote sandbar on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River. At first, he couldn't remember exactly which tree he had buried her under, but then admitted that he had placed a bag of fertilizer on top of her body. One of the policemen, who was an active gardener, explained that large quantities of fertilizer killed trees. They looked around and found 3 dead trees that were of interest to them. They excavated there, and under one of the trees, they did find Jackie's body wearing the same clothes she had last been seen in. The woman was identified from dental records as Jackie Waller. Finally, Jackie's loved ones recognized that she was definitely dead and found her body. Then they were able to commit her to the ground. The woman's funeral was held on her parents' golden wedding day. Cheryl told their children that their mom was gone, and she had been killed by their father. This event was a great shock to the children because they lost both their mother and father at once. The children developed a deep aversion to Clay and refused to communicate with him henceforth. As part of the agreement, Clay had to officially confess to the murder of his ex-wife and provide specific details. He explained that the initial thoughts of murder began to surface about a year before the tragic event, when Jackie announced their separation. Despite this, he tried to suppress those dark thoughts, as Jackie was the mother of his children. However, he couldn't bear the idea of her taking his children away. He warned Jackie that such actions would have dire consequences for her, but she didn't heed his warning, which he considered her fault. The night prior to the murder, Clay traveled to a secluded area on Devil's Island to dig a grave for Jackie. According to him, their divorce proceedings were generally progressing smoothly. On that particular day, after a visit to their lawyer, they had a conversation in which she suggested they engage in intimacy one last time. They then went back to his home, where they talked in the kitchen. While looking for a snack in the refrigerator, Clay accidentally raised his head, hitting Jackie and causing her nose to bleed. This incident angered her. She stormed out into the hallway, where she smeared blood on the walls and started yelling at him that he would never see his children again. At this point, Clay lost control and attacked her. He hit her in the face with his hand and then strangled her. Subsequently, he took Jackie's body out in a dumpster and buried it in the pre-dug grave. Afterward, he meticulously cleaned out both the car and house, took a shower, changed clothes, as if nothing happened, and then went on to meet his new girlfriend and son at a toy store. Throughout this process, Clay claimed that everything was driven by impulse and emotion. He did not originally intend to kill Jackie. This contradicted his earlier statement, claiming he had dug the grave the day before. However, if Clay did not plan to kill the woman, why would he have dug the grave beforehand? It appeared to be premeditated murder. The medical examiner found multiple skull fractures on the deceased, indicating blunt force rather than a simple beating with fists. No one believed his story. Clay, who showed no remorse for killing his ex-wife, felt jubilant at receiving only 20 years in prison for second-degree murder, with the possibility of early release. The prosecutor, however, had another strategy. Clay's testimony about digging the grave buried him further. He had dug the hole in Illinois, while the murder occurred in Missouri. These actions fell under the federal law against domestic violence across state lines, and their violation allowed an additional 35 years to be added to his sentence. Clay Waller will be eligible for parole after serving 85% of his 55-year sentence. It turned out that Clay was unaware of such a law and did not foresee the consequences of his confession. Yet, his atrocities continued. Demonstrating further callousness, he wrote a book detailing Jackie's murder to profit from the tragedy. Sherelle, Jackie's sister, along with her husband, continues to raise Jackie's children with support from their elderly parents. The children have grown up remembering their mother as an exceptional person who remains forever in their hearts. They still harbor anger toward their father and deeply miss their mom. Jamie Hahn was born on October 25, 1983. Growing up in Orangeburg, South Carolina, she lived with her two brothers and sister, Brett, Justin, and Ashley. Despite their parents' divorce and remarriage, Jamie remained a cheerful child. She attended a small yet renowned private prep school celebrated for its educational excellence. In junior high, Jamie visited the University of North Carolina with her classmates. She instantly fell in love with the campus and aspired to attend. Even as a student, she aimed to impact others' lives by joining the board of the Center of Hope to support troubled teens. Later on, Jamie engaged in various political campaigns. One notable campaign was Senator John Edwards' 2008 presidential run, a competitor to Obama. During this campaign, Jamie emerged as a prominent figure in North Carolina's Democratic Party. During one campaign, she met Nation and formed a deep professional relationship with him that later evolved from platonic to romantic. 4 months after their first romantic moment, they announced their engagement and married on April 18, 2009. Their intense love was anchored in a deep friendship. Jamie and Nation thrived in their respective careers. Jamie ran her own political fundraising consulting firm, while Nation was a well-known online strategist aiding politicians and nonprofits with their campaigns. Described by friends and acquaintances as exceptionally kind, tender, and generous, the couple was well regarded. They took their marriage vows seriously and actively participated in projects like the Coalition to Protect Young Families in North Carolina. Although they were childless at that time, Jamie and Nation planned on starting a family soon. They both enjoyed vibrant social lives. Jamie was known among her friends and family as a compassionate individual who had the ability to spread happiness wherever she went. Her talent and enthusiasm for politics led many to foresee a promising future for her. However, unexpectedly, their seemingly perfect world suddenly fell apart on April 22, 2013. Around 5:20 p.m., Jamie frantically ran from her house and sprinted a few dozen meters before collapsing unconscious in a neighbor's yard. Her body was drenched in blood. Onlookers on the street were shocked by the scene and shouted for someone to call 911. A neighbor, who saw the turmoil unfolding in his yard, immediately phoned emergency services. Through Jameen's disoriented words, he understood that someone named John, who seemed to still be inside her house, had assaulted her with a knife. He quickly applied a towel to the numerous wounds on her abdomen and urgently summoned an ambulance and the police. Arriving patrol officers traced the blood from the neighbor's yard back to the Hahn residence. Encircling the house, they commanded the individual inside to exit with hands raised. Moments later, a disheveled bald man emerged on the porch. The officers noted he bore wrist injuries and a stab wound in his abdomen. Due to his injuries, this unidentified man was transported to the hospital in an ambulance, escorted by a police officer. En route to the hospital, the wounded man grew distressed and tearful, expressing regret that this hadn't occurred sooner, and repeatedly murmuring a desire to die. Following his medical treatment, the police endeavored to ascertain his identity, reasons for being in the Hahn residence, and circumstances leading to this tragic event. They soon discovered he was 31-year-old Jonathan Wayne Brill, a close friend of Nation and a guest in their home. Jameen also knew John well. She had employed him as an accountant in her political consulting firm after he relocated to North Carolina. The couple had generously offered him accommodation in their home until he could find his own place. Nation and John hailed from the same hometown and first crossed paths in 2000 during a church trip. Despite a 4-year age gap, they quickly struck up a friendship. As it often happens with childhood friends, they drifted apart when one went off to college, but rekindled their bond post-graduation. They became virtually inseparable. Jonathan even had the honor of being the best man at Nation and Jameen's wedding. In April 2009, the trio was akin to the Three Musketeers, following the ethos of one for all and all for one. They shared vacations, regular Monday dinners, and celebrated holidays together. To some neighbors, Jonathan seemed almost like an extension of the Hahn family, given how much time he spent at their home. This deep, seemingly unbreakable bond makes the violent incident that left all three with stab wounds in their own home all the more perplexing and tragic. Every Monday, Jamie and Nation would host their mutual friend Jonathan for dinner. On that particular day, Broyhill arrived earlier than usual with the intention of discussing recent campaign details with Jamie. The friends were deeply concerned about John's well-being, as he had confided in them about his diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, a notably aggressive and often terminal disease. The Hahns, in their caring nature, accompanied Jonathan to his medical appointments and were consistently present, offering every possible support in his arduous battle for life. There was an instance when Jamie, overwhelmed with emotion, asked Nation if they should consider having a child soon, so that their future offspring might have the chance to know Jonathan. Such was their affection and regard for their friend, they wished even their yet-to-be-born child could have the opportunity to bond with him. The recent diagnosis of cancer was a harsh blow, but it wasn't the first health challenge Brill had encountered. Over the years, John had experienced multiple hospitalizations. He had once revealed to Nation that he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during a gallbladder operation. Consequently, the Hahns invited Jonathan to live with them temporarily, offering care and support until his health improved. On that fateful Monday, Jamie and Jonathan were already engaged in work-related discussions in the kitchen when Nation arrived home and headed upstairs to change. Nation was startled by Jamie's screams calling out his and then John's name. Assuming that Brill may have fallen ill given his medical condition, Nation hurried downstairs midway. He was met with Jameen's terror-stricken voice, crying out that someone was trying to stab her. Rushing into the kitchen, Nation was confronted with the horrifying sight of his wife on the floor, bleeding profusely. John stood over her, wielding a large kitchen knife. As Brill started advancing towards Nation, knife raised threateningly, Nation froze in disbelief. How could such a nightmare unfold in mere minutes? In a desperate act of self-defense, Nation grabbed the knife blade with one hand while striking John in the face with his other hand. Amidst this chaos, he frantically urged Jameen to run for safety. Attempting to subdue a man who until moments ago was his closest friend seemed almost unreal. Despite her grave injuries, Jameen miraculously managed to rise from the floor and flee through the side door of their home. Once she was out, Nation, overcoming shock and tumult, pushed Jonathan aside and hurried after his wife. Outside, Jameen desperately made her way to the nearest neighbor's house for help. Unfortunately, no one responded to her urgent knocking. Summoning her remaining strength, she attempted to reach the next house, but collapsed unconscious in their yard due to her overwhelming injuries. Alerted by the commotion and drawn by the screams, passers-by quickly came to her assistance, while a neighbor called for an ambulance and the police. Meanwhile, Nation, panicked, searched frantically for Jameen. Following the trail of blood led him to discover her in a neighbor's yard. She was conscious, but in agony, clutching her side. Kneeling beside her, he took her hand and tried comforting her with promises of recovery and future anniversaries and vacations by the sea, though tears streamed down his face. As he spoke, clutching Jameen's hand, Nation was overwhelmed by thoughts of a life without her and unable to fathom how their peaceful life had taken such a sudden turn. As they awaited help, a neighbor swiftly brought a towel to press against Jameen's bleeding abdomen. Unfortunately, the towel was quickly soaked with blood. Another compassionate neighbor elevated Jameen's legs onto a bag of leaves, trying to give some comfort. The ambulance was on its way, but to the onlookers, the wait felt endless, even though it was only a few minutes. Jameen's breathing grew labored, a clear sign of her critical state. When the paramedics arrived, they promptly administered life-saving measures. Nation, having suffered severe cuts to his hand while wrestling with the knife, also desperately needed medical attention. Both he and Jameen were rushed to the hospital. During transport, Jameen lost consciousness and upon arrival was taken immediately for emergency surgery. Meanwhile, Nation, overwhelmed with worry for his wife and oblivious to his own pain, received stitches. He was in such shock that he repeatedly tried to enter the ICU, desperate for any updates about Jameen, but was denied access. Seated anxiously on a hospital bed, Nation was tormented by thoughts of Jameen's condition. Over a dozen stab wounds, a severed artery, and severe liver damage. His only solace during those excruciating moments was hoping and praying for her survival. By some miracle, Jameen did survive the surgery initially. But tragically, this hope was short-lived. She never regained consciousness. 2 days after this harrowing ordeal, Jameen succumbed to her injuries. The autopsy revealed a grim reality. She had sustained 24 stab wounds across various parts of her body, including her face, neck, back, hands, and forearms. However, the most lethal injuries were inflicted on her abdomen and chest, resulting in catastrophic damage to her lungs and liver. Meanwhile, Jonathan Brill had inflicted wounds upon himself and was hospitalized for 8 days to recover from his self-inflicted injuries. On Tuesday, April 30th, 2013, still needing medical attention with bandages on both wrists, Brill was transported on a stretcher to the magistrate's office in Wake County. The individual was formally charged with first-degree murder in the case Jameen Han and assault with a deadly weapon on Nation Han. Due to the severity of the charges, he was held without bail and at Central Prison in Raleigh. This facility was specifically chosen because it housed a hospital wing, ensuring that Bry Hill would continue to receive the necessary medical treatment while in custody for his crimes. The tragic and sudden loss of Jameen profoundly impacted many, leaving a lingering question. Why would someone she considered a best friend commit such a horrific act, robbing her of her future? In the wake of the tragedy, speculation swirled within the community about a substantial amount of money that had gone missing during the election campaign, managed by Jameen's team. Jonathan Brill, who had served as the accountant, officially ceased working for the company at the end of 2012. Despite this, he remained responsible for providing Jameen with financial details and assisting in the preparation of financial reports. It was suspected that Jameen might have discovered the missing funds, which totaled over $50,000, and confronted Jonathan about this discrepancy. This confrontation could have triggered his violent outburst. On April 22, 2013, Jameen had invited Jonathan over for their regular Monday dinner and intended to discuss the company's financial issues. The exact sequence of events during Nation's brief absence remains unclear. However, it is widely believed that Jameen might have challenged Jonathan regarding the missing funds during this time. As time passed, Nation's physical wounds began to heal, but emotional and psychological scars remained deep and unhealing. 6 months following this devastating event, Jamine's family and nation, her grieving husband, scattered her ashes near Pulaski Memorial Baptist Church. This place was significant because Jamine had dedicated her time and efforts as a volunteer there. In a poignant twist of fate, just a week before the tragedy, the Hahns had requested the church's pastor to pray for Jonathan, who they believed was battling cancer. Did they know that soon it would be they who needed the prayers of their community in the wake of such an unimaginable loss? The nation had to grapple with the truth that an individual he had known from childhood, whom he saw as his dearest friend, had completely shattered his life, and even more heartbreakingly, claimed the life of the woman he adored more than anything in the world. According to Nation, Jamine was his anchor, his backbone, and his soulmate. He couldn't fathom how the sun could continue to glow without her. The trial of Brill commenced on March 4, 2015. The district attorney informed the jury that Jonathan, serving as Jenny's financial manager, had written 39 checks to himself, misappropriating around $50,000, the identical sum missing from the account. To rationalize his deeds, Brill claimed various health issues, including brain impairment from multiple sclerosis, memory deficits, a gallbladder operation, and pancreatic cancer. Compassionate Jamie refrained from confronting John about such a sensitive matter during his challenging times. She tactfully sidestepped the issue, hoping Brill would identify and rectify the mistake. All seemed normal until she got a call from a debt collector. Then the district attorney unveiled a startling truth. The preceding year, the defendant's first hospitalization occurred when he was admitted following an episode at Hans's residence. Prior to that, Jonathan hadn't sought any medical treatment, as his health records confirmed. All along he had deceived Jamie and Nation about his health conditions. No gallbladder operation, no multiple sclerosis, and no cancer, but merely a manifest mental disorder and something dreadful. Within the search history, revealed that the man had been seeking information on pancreatic cancer and specialists in this particular field, evidently to lend credibility to his falsehoods. He also looked up cruises that could be taken without a passport. John had arranged a one-way journey to Las Vegas for April 23rd, but cancelled it on the 22nd, merely 2 hours before assaulting Jamie with a knife. Jonathan admitted to the authorities that he had indeed misappropriated the campaign funds and fabricated all his medical conditions. When the Hahns escorted him to medical appointments, waiting in the car as devoted, caring friends, he merely roamed the hospital halls. In recent times, Jonathan grappled with depression and suicidal inclinations. He confessed to being tormented by voices urging him to harm others. He purchased the knife for himself, supposedly planning to use it in Vegas to end his life. Yet, he believed Jamine would confront him about the financial irregularities. When she did, he began to inflict wounds on himself. Jamin attempted to intervene, but at that point, he was so deranged and furious that he started assaulting his friend impulsively. Jonathan recalled attacking Jamie, yet parts of this episode were wiped from his memory. His lawyer and Jonathan himself realized that fully dismissing the charges was unfeasible due to the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. Still, they aimed to argue for temporary insanity to lessen the sentence. Before the jury retired to deliberate, Nation Hahn was allowed to speak. With a voice filled with sorrow, he expressed, "We lock our doors at night to block out the world's evil, but it's chilling to think what occurs when evil holds the key." He addressed these words to his former best friend. On March 19, 2015, the jury announced their decision. They ruled Jonathan Brill guilty of first-degree murder of Jamie Hahn and the attempted murder of Nation Hahn. The judge issued a life sentence without parole. Jamine's intentions were utterly pure, and her death was so senseless that even Jonathan later acknowledged in an interview that if he had been honest with the Hahns, she would have forgiven him. Suddenly, their closest friend became their worst fear. This story defies any rational explanation. Hello friends, today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Luz Maria Lopez. Luz Maria Lopez was born on March 17, 1995. in the small town of San Cristobal Verapaz. Her family was simple and modest. Her parents were A. Morales and Brian Lopez. Luz Maria was the youngest of two children. She grew up with her older brother, Omar. As an infant, she faced a life-threatening intestinal obstruction. To save her, doctors performed a complex operation without guarantees of success. Her mother prayed fervently for her recovery and firmly believed that her daughter would pull through, and she did. The surgery at such an early age did not impact Luz Maria's development. Throughout her school years, Luz Maria actively engaged in sports, especially gymnastics and athletics. She also had a passion for classical choreography. Her creative nature made it easy for her to communicate and connect with different people, quickly forming friendships. Academically inclined towards the humanities, she excelled in her studies. After finishing school, Luz Maria contemplated higher education and opted for a prestigious state university. She decided to pursue a law degree and later specialized in criminalistics due to her genuine interest in this field. A significant moment occurred during her student years when Luz Maria and her mother visited a car dealership in Coban, the capital of Alta Verapaz. It was Omar's 25th birthday that year, and they wanted to gift him something special, a motorcycle he had always dreamed of. At the showroom, a polite and attentive young consultant named Jorge welcomed them. He showed them various models and provided recommendations. Mother and daughter chose a model but wanted to consult with the head of the family before finalizing their decision. They left with a business card from the dealership and Luz Maria's phone number for future reference. Soon after, Jorge called Luz Maria, not about the motorcycle, but on a more personal note. Over time, these calls became frequent until Jorge mustered the courage to ask her out for coffee. It was clear that he had a strong attraction to the beautiful, sultry brunette, but he was unsure how to initiate their acquaintance. Luz Maria also found this handsome young man appealing. When he proposed they meet, she agreed readily. Although the young man was a year younger than her, this slight difference didn't hinder their growing connection. Their romantic relationship blossomed almost immediately. Both felt it was love at first sight and believed in a future filled with happiness together. After only a few months, the couple chose to live together, despite their parents' disapproval of such haste. Soon after, they were married. Approximately 6 months later, they held a wedding ceremony, inviting only their closest friends and family to celebrate with them. However, issues arose on the day of the wedding. The banquet venue encountered a problem, which almost disrupted the entire event. The couple had to pay a significant additional amount to ensure the celebration proceeded as planned. Little is known about Jorge, Luz Maria's chosen partner. Born in 1996 in Santa Catalina Latina in central Guatemala, Jorge was the eldest of 2 sons and grew up with his brother Pablo. Their family often faced financial hardships, balancing on the edge of poverty. Thus, there wasn't enough money for luxurious clothes or expensive toys. It barely covered necessities. Despite these challenges, Jorge lacked aspirations for a better life and didn't focus on studying or securing a decent job. People who knew Jorge personally described him as withdrawn and sometimes even aggressive due to his trouble controlling emotions. Consequently, he didn't have many friends and struggled with relationships. Nonetheless, meeting his dream girl sparked determination within him. He worked hard to win her love and hurried to marry her out of fear she might change her mind. It's worth mentioning that Luz Maria's parents were skeptical about their son-in-law right from the beginning. Overall, despite some initial challenges and doubts from others around them, their connection remained strong and unwavering. Something about this young man didn't sit right with them. They couldn't pinpoint it, and they couldn't convince their daughter not to marry him. Soon after the wedding, she became pregnant. Without a university degree, finding a good job was tough. Employers didn't want to hire someone inexperienced and expecting a baby, so she had to settle odd jobs. Her husband, by that time, had lost his job too, and wasn't eager to find a new one. When their daughter Alice was born, money became really tight. With both of them unemployed, they struggled to pay rent or even buy food and basic necessities. Then Jorge suggested moving in with his parents temporarily. Luz Maria Lopez resisted for a long while, but eventually agreed. They couldn't stay on the streets with a baby. Luz Maria Lopez's mother was aware of her daughter's family issues and often urged her to come back home. But Luz Maria Lopez kept saying things would get better with her husband, and there was no need to worry. One day, the mother decided to visit her daughter and granddaughter at her son-in-law's parents' house and found a distressing scene. Luz Maria Lopez was in terrible shape, eating just once a day, and that too very little. However, Jorge's family didn't see the need to provide for their unemployed daughter-in-law. It's terrible. Luz Maria Lopez was breastfeeding Alice, so lack of proper nutrition threatened both their healths. But inadequate meals were only part of the myriad problems she faced in her mother-in-law's home, as she later discovered. She was constantly humiliated and even beaten by her husband's younger brother. He was irritated by the crying of the child and the presence of items in the house. His frustration him to repeatedly throw these items at Maria. On one occasion, he launched a baby bottle that struck little Alice, who was in her mother's arms. Jorge witnessed all of this, but never once stood up for his wife and daughter, acting as if they were strangers to him. Maria's mother persuaded her to take her granddaughter and return to the parents' house. Soon after, Jorge appeared at their doorstep, asking his wife to come back, promising he would find employment. She agreed, but only on the condition that they would rent an apartment and live separately from Jorge's parents. When Maria successfully defended her diploma, she fulfilled a long-time dream by securing a job with the city prosecutor's office. A smart, talented, and responsible young woman, she quickly earned the respect of her colleagues and began moving up the career ladder. Over time, the family's financial situation improved considerably. They could even afford to buy a car for two. However, this improvement was solely due to Maria's diligent work and reputation. Jorge was still searching for himself and preferred living at his wife's expense. He was jealous, lazy, and a domestic type with an explosive temper, which worsened over time. Jorge did not want to work, taking only temporary part-time jobs, if at all. He preferred sitting at home in front of the TV, drinking beer with friends, and spending what his wife earned. Moreover, Jorge was pathologically jealous and tried to control every move of his beloved. He did not permit her to make friends or have lunch with colleagues in cafes or just be somewhere without him. Constantly checking her phone records and reading messages became routine for him. He also forbade her from registering accounts on social networks. At home, when left alone with Maria, Jorge's behavior did not improve in any way. He often created scandals in seemingly calm places, constantly clarified his relationships, and habitually blamed his wife for any problems or family troubles. When they lived at his parents' house, Jorge never stood up for his wife. He just watched as she was humiliated, insulted, and occasionally even beaten by his relatives. Jorge himself also sometimes resorted to violence and didn't see anything wrong with it. He treated Luz Maria as if she were his property, believing she would endure everything and wouldn't leave him. Neighbors frequently heard screams from their home and saw signs of beatings on the young woman's face and body. Luz Maria repeatedly tried to leave her husband and considered filing for divorce. Several times, she took her daughter and moved out to live with her parents. However, each time, her husband would go there, literally begging on his knees for forgiveness. Remarkably, each time Luz Maria forgave him and gave him another chance, despite her parents urging her to come to her senses and leave the abusive man. On December 15, 2020, after another violent altercation with Jorge, Luz Maria took their 3-year-old daughter Alice, got into the car in tears, and went to her mother's house. The following day, Jorge arrived there. His intentions were unclear, whether he wanted his wife back or simply the car. He claimed he had found a job and assured everyone that their lives would change. Additionally, he promised never to raise a hand against his wife again. Surprisingly, Luz Maria believed him yet again and returned with him to their rented apartment. In mid-January 2021, Luz Maria called her mother to complain that not only did Jorge fail to secure a job as promised, but had also stolen the money she earned, effectively leaving the family destitute. Her mother felt sorry for her daughter and offered financial help so they could get by until the next salary was received. The women agreed to meet on the morning of January 19th, but Luz Maria did not arrive at the designated time. She decided to visit her daughter's workplace the next day. Upon arrival, she discovered that Luz Maria Lopez hadn't shown up for 2 days, and no one had been able to contact her. At the same time, Jorge, also searching for his wife, appeared at the prosecutor's office. He mentioned that they had argued again and thought Luz Maria Lopez had gone to her mother's house. He figured she wasn't answering because she was upset with him. The concerned mother immediately felt something was wrong and suspected her son-in-law might be lying. She went straight to the police to initiate a search for Luz Maria Lopez without delay. That same day, an alert system named Isabel Claudina, originally Alerta Isabel Claudina, was activated nationwide. This emergency system was triggered for young women reported missing. When the extensive search began, Luz Maria Lopez's husband was quickly identified as the prime suspect, though it would actually be more accurate to say he was the only suspect. Luz Maria Lopez had no known enemies or reasons someone would kidnap her, and Jorge was the last person seen with her alive. Naturally, he denied any involvement in her disappearance, asserting that he himself was distraught over her absence and irritated by being labeled as the main suspect. Despite his denials, Jorge repeatedly contradicted himself during questioning and failed to provide a clear explanation as to why he hadn't informed the police on the actual day of his wife's disappearance. He claimed he believed she was at his mother-in-law's home, but didn't call or visit there. While law enforcement searched for witnesses and combed through areas for any clues, a breakthrough came on January 22nd. Municipal workers accidentally discovered Luz Maria Lopez's body while responding to a call about a clogged storm drain near a road. Upon lifting the grate to access the drain, they found an unusual large plastic bag containing something black inside. Upon closer inspection, the observers were horrified to discover charred human remains. They promptly reported this gruesome finding to the authorities. Upon arrival, the police officers speculated that the body might belong to Luz Maria Lopez, who was widely looking for after nationwide. Forensic experts later verified that the remains were indeed those of a young woman. Her parents and brother, despite the severe disfigurement caused by the fire, confirmed her identity with certainty. What's coincident is that the package containing her remains was found on the same street as the prosecutor's office where she had worked. This location lacked surveillance cameras and lighting. Despite how badly burned the body was, pathologists determined that she had been severely beaten before death. The cause of death was asphyxia, indicated by internal hemorrhages, multiple fractures sustained while she was still alive, and particles of dried blood in her nose and mouth. Additionally, there were deep marks on her neck, pointing to strangulation. At the time of discovery, no new suspects had emerged in the investigation. The victim's parents firmly believed that their son-in-law had brutally murdered their daughter. Consequently, Jorge was taken into custody while authorities examined his motive for committing such a heinous act. In addition to the investigation, psychologists and criminal analysts needed to scrutinize the marriage and family dynamics closely. During these proceedings, Ms. Lopez submitted a disturbing audio recording sent anonymously by a neighbor familiar with her daughter's household. This person had frequently witnessed domestic disputes between Luz Maria and her husband, but decided to record one such incident without realizing it would culminate in murder. The audio captured Luz Maria desperately crying for help amid little sobs in the background. Ms. Lopez was horrified by what she heard and lamented that if this witness had alerted authorities earlier, her daughter might still be alive today. The individual who captured the recording did not contact the police, nor did they visit the residence from which the distressing screams emanated. the authorities were unable to trace this anonymous person, making it impossible to involve them as a witness in the investigation. Consequently, the audio recording was included in the criminal materials. A key witness gave a detailed interview urging all citizens to stay vigilant and report incidents of domestic violence to the police, rather than merely documenting them with devices such as cameras. This approach, she stated, could potentially save lives. This crime triggered significant public outrage, prompting thousands to take to the streets in protest, demanding that the perpetrator be brought to justice. Jorge was promptly taken into custody, but persistently denied any wrongdoing. He claimed he personally drove his wife to work on that ill-fated day, when she subsequently vanished. Street CCTV footage indeed captured their vehicle heading towards Luz Maria Lopez's workplace that morning. However, due to tinted windows, it was indiscernible how many individuals were inside. None of the video clips showed the car stopping or Luz Maria exiting. Further discoveries were uncovered at the couple's rented home, where faint traces of cleaned blood and drag marks were detected. These findings suggested that a violent crime likely occurred there. An additional piece of evidence came when microscopic fragments of burnt flesh were discovered in the trunk of their family car. Moreover, during their search, investigators paid close attention to a recent purchase made by Jorge and his wife, a double orthopedic mattress. It wasn't so much about the mattress itself, but rather its dense polyethylene wrapping, which analysis revealed had been used to transport Luz Maria's burnt remains. Additionally, several neighbors testified about having repeatedly heard Jorge verbally abusing and threatening his wife with death just days before her sudden disappearance. Her husband had shouted that he would kill her if she decided to leave him, and that he would hide her body so that no one would ever find it. Based on the data collected by expert criminologists, as well as the testimony of several witnesses, the investigation presented a gruesome picture of the crime. The murder occurred on the night of January 19, 2021. The day before, the couple had a big fight, and Jorge once again resorted to violence with his fists. He had previously had issues with his temper, but this time, he went into an uncontrollable rage. He struck his wife multiple times, causing her to scream and cry for help. These screams were heard by their neighbors, but nobody called the police. During the beating, Jorge broke his wife's nose and caused a head injury. After this brutal assault, he strangled her with his bare hands and then attempted to dispose of the body. He dragged it into the backyard, doused it with campfire liquid, and set it on fire. However, Jorge did not anticipate how smoky and foul-smelling the burning flesh and hair would be. Concerned that neighbors might notice and call the fire department or police, he quickly extinguished the fire. He wrapped the charred remains in plastic and sought a secluded location where he believed the body would never be found. The most horrific aspect was that Jorge committed these acts in front of their young daughter. Despite her tender age, she somewhat comprehended what was occurring. The child, 3.5 years old at the time, witnessed both the beating and subsequent murder, as evidenced by her cries and screams, which were also recorded. Aware of some forensic techniques from his wife's textbooks at home, a fact due to their abundance, Jorge attempted to cover up his crime and establish an alibi. He found a dark stretch of road without lights or video surveillance cameras and disposed of his wife's body in a drainage sewer there, thinking he could go unnoticed. The next morning, he drove to her place of work along the usual route, as if he had taken Maria there just as he did every morning. The following day, he began to simulate an active search for his wife, calling her colleagues, acquaintances, and relatives. The criminal's lawyers delayed the trial as much as they could. They also attempted to throw the investigation off track. They insisted that all the evidence and witness statements were circumstantial, emphasizing that not a single piece of evidence unequivocally proved Jorge's guilt. Defense attorneys tried to get the detention changed to house arrest. They argued that Jorge himself was deeply depressed due to being accused of killing the woman he loved and the mother of his child. However, Decisive evidence came from data obtained from Maria's phone. All this time, the device was in her husband's possession. On the first day after the crime, several messages were sent from it to different people in an attempt to create the appearance that Maria was still alive. Tracking all movements of the smartphone that day showed it was constantly in the same places as Jorge's phone. Despite this evidence, lawyers tried to turn it in favor of their client, claiming Jorge found his wife's phone and drove around with it searching for her. Yet no one could explain why he was sending messages from it or calling it from his own cell phone. Another proof of guilt was bruises and scratches on Jorge's body found on the day of his arrest. These marks were photographed by experts and indicated that Maria clearly resisted. The most vivid was a scratch on his neck. Unfortunately, particles of Jorge's epithelium under Maria's fingernails couldn't be found because they were destroyed by fire. Despite many controversial points, the prosecutor asked for the maximum possible punishment for Jorge. Court hearings and proceedings were repeatedly postponed due to the raging worldwide pandemic. But in October 2022, Jorge was finally found guilty of his wife's brutal murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison. Although he maintained his innocence throughout, custody of little Alice was given to her maternal grandparents, who admitted their granddaughter now holds the main meaning in their lives.
During the London Olympics, a young Puerto Rican boxer, Felix Verdejo Sanchez, emerged as a shining star. Heralded as a diamond, he was seen as one of the most promising athletes from his country, with predictions of future titles and gold medals. Everyone believed that this talented and driven young man would reach incredible heights in the world of sports. In 2021, Felix Verdejo's name resurfaced in the global media, but this time it was in the crime section. The story revolves around a teenage romance that grew into an obsession, ultimately leading to a horrific tragedy. This tale also highlights how the 2014 Knockout of the Year recipient, praised and promoted by two-time Olympic champion Vasyl Lomachenko, narrowly avoided a death sentence and was sentenced to life imprisonment instead. Despite overwhelming evidence and his accomplice's confession, Verdejo continues to deny any guilt. Born on May 19, 1993, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Felix grew up in a modest, large family and had a passion for sports from an early age. Initially, he planned to pursue a career in baseball, but a pivotal incident changed his path. At 9 years old, after a quarrel and fight with a visiting friend's son, Felix's father suggested he take up boxing if he wanted to fight. Felix fell in love with boxing from his first training session at the local gym. By 16, Felix won the Pan American Junior Championships, followed by his country's championship a year later. In 2012, he reached the quarterfinals at the London Olympics, marking the start of his impressive professional career. Verdejo had 29 fights, securing 27 victories. In 2014, he was credited with the year's best knockout against Sergio Villanueva. A year later, Felix won his first championship belt, the WBO Latino title, which he defended 6 times over 2 years. His skill and talent left no doubt that he was destined for greatness in boxing history. Keishla Rodriguez, born in November 1993 in San Juan, had a similar background. Her full name was Keishla Marlene Rodriguez Ortiz. She grew up in a close-knit family with her parents, Jose and Kayla Rodriguez, her sister, Beralise Nicole, and her half-brother, Jonathan. Keishla was outgoing, excelled in school, and loved animals, aspiring to be a veterinarian. Her sister, Beralise, was her confidant and best friend. Keishla and Felix attended the same school and developed a romantic relationship in their teenage years. When Keishla's parents divorced in 2011, her mother moved to Florida, but Keishla and her sister remained in San Juan, staying closely connected. At 18, the promising boxer Felix, who had already competed in the Olympics, began dating Elisa Maria Santiago Sierra, a young aspiring model. Despite being in a relationship with Elisa, Felix continued seeing his childhood friend Keishla. Keishla's sister and mother knew about the affair and disapproved of it, recognizing the complexity of the situation. Elisa believed she was Felix's one true love and future wife, while Keishla, aware of Felix's engagement, found herself unable to break away from him. Felix's relationships were tumultuous, marked by his rising fame and the constant attention from admirers. Despite his serious relationship with Elisa, he could not let go of Keishla. This love triangle, filled with deception and emotional turmoil, ultimately led to a tragic conclusion. The once promising star of Puerto Rican boxing, who seemed destined for greatness, ended up in the criminal chronicles, his legacy forever marred by the events that unfolded in 2021.
On top of that, he was her first great love, and deep down, the naive girl herself still hoped to be the one. In 2016, the boxer did marry the young Eliza, who at that time was barely 19 years old. Eliza by that time was already quite a famous model, had tens of thousands of followers in social networks, and also opened her own beauty studio for eyelash extensions. In August of the same year, just a few months after the wedding, the athlete got into a serious car accident when he was rushing on his motorcycle. He was taken to the hospital in serious condition with head injuries, bruises, and lacerations. His trainer, Ricky Marquez, seriously feared that his talented charge would go off the rails at the height of his career. But Felix, contrary to the disappointing prognosis, made a rapid recovery and soon returned to the ring. In September 2019, the boxer published in his profile in the social network a picture with Elise, who was in a large term of pregnancy. In the comment to the photo, he wrote, "Soon I will meet my daddy's princess." And a month later, he announced the birth of a daughter, who was given the name Miranda Verdejo Santiago. The young man in public looked like a loving husband, caring father, and an exemplary family man. But secretly from his wife, he continued to meet with Keishla, who could not let go. As Eliza later admitted, she guessed that her husband was cheating on her, but every time he tearfully vowed to leave his mistress. Keishla repeatedly tried to break off this painful relationship, but Felix would not let her go. She had no other men, because the boxer threatened that if he found out about the fact that Keishla had someone, not good for her and her chosen one, Keishla herself, who had fallen in love with Verdejo since high school, continued to love him despite everything. Rodriguez, as planned, connected her life with the care of animals and got a job at the Center of Veterinary Medicine and Aesthetics. Colleagues described her as conscientious, hardworking, and very responsible. She lived with 2 dogs and a cat, which she simply adored. In 2020, Eliza discovered the correspondence of her husband with several mistresses, including Keishla. The wife gave her husband a scandal and threw him out of the house, threatening that she would file for divorce and forbid him to see his daughter. Eliza's threats had an effect. In addition, in the career of the athlete at that time, there was a serious decline and unnecessary problems where he did not need. For a while, he really stopped seeing Rodriguez, but Felix still did not let her go, trying to control almost every step Keishla. After a few months of secret visits resumed, and in April 2021, Keishla discovered that she was pregnant. She bought a rapid test at the drugstore, which only confirmed her fears. She first called her sister, who was aware of her complicated relationship with the athlete, and told her everything. It was out of the question to have an abortion, because Keishla was already 27 years old, and she was ready to have a child, even if she had to raise it on her own. A few days later, Keishla broke the news to the father of her child, hoping in her heart that he would accept it. But Felix was not happy, to put it mildly. He got angry and told his mistress that she should go to the doctor, and if the pregnancy is confirmed, it will be necessary to have an abortion. Naturally, Rodriguez answered him with a firm refusal, but the boxer began to threaten her and insist. Felix said that an illegitimate child will finally destroy his reputation, and this he cannot allow. After Keishla's visit to the hospital, her pregnancy was confirmed, and she now had a certificate to prove it. She called Felix and told him everything, which made him furious. Felix shouted and demanded that Keishla immediately get rid of the child, but she again responded with a categorical refusal. Then the athlete decided to go on the sly, saying that he did not believe her and wanted to personally look at the issued medical certificate. He appointed Keishla a meeting in the evening in a crowded place which did not surprise her because they always tried not to draw attention to themselves and did not get in front of anyone. A few days before the meeting, the boxer stopped by his old friend Luis Antonio Padiz, who worked in a local machine shop and also had ties with the criminal world, selling illegal drugs. Felix briefly outlined the situation and asked him to help him get rid of his pregnant mistress. Luis had previously been in the field of vision of the police, and the prospect of being in prison scared him. But the athlete was persistent, assured that everything would go smoothly and the police will never come out on them. Besides, Felix promised him an impressive cash reward, and Luis agreed, with the support of an accomplice. Felix called Kishla and told her that he wanted to meet her on the evening of April 29th to confirm her pregnancy and decide what to do next. Immediately after talking to her lover, Kishla called her sister back and told her everything. She still had hope that Felix would accept her child and would not insist on an abortion. But Berylise, all this situation, is quite alarmed. She knew that the boyfriend had threatened her sister, and she was worried that he wouldn't do anything to her. Berylise called her mother and shared her concerns, but even together they could not dissuade Kishla from that fateful meeting. At the appointed time, Rodriguez, taking a doctor's note, arrived at the meeting in her own Kia Forte automobile. Verdejo drove there in his pickup truck, in the back of which Luis was hiding. Kishla immediately got into the athlete's car and showed him the results of the tests. He once again talked about terminating the pregnancy, but Kishla, crying, again responded with a refusal. Against this background, the couple began to quarrel violently, turning to shouting. Then Felix suddenly hit Kishla in the head with his fist, from which she immediately lost consciousness. Until Kishla regained consciousness, Felix took a syringe with a large dose of illegal substances hidden in the glove compartment of the car, which Luis had obtained at his request, and injected Kishla. Then, together with his accomplice, they carried her to the back of the car, where there were already prepared pieces of wire and a concrete block. The men tied Rodriguez up, attached the load, and then covered her with a tarp so that no one would accidentally see anything. Felix then returned to the pickup truck while his accomplice got behind the wheel of Kishla's vehicle. Together, they drove to the bridge over the San Jose Lagoon. It was virtually deserted at night, and the men, making sure no one could see them, threw Kishla, still alive, into the water. Afterward, however, they decided to fire a few test shots in pursuit, using the firearms they had brought with them so as not to leave the victim any chance. Having finished the massacre, each of the perpetrators went home. Kishla's co-workers were the first to worry when she didn't show up at the Veterinary Medicine and Aesthetics Center the next day. Kishla has always been very responsible and couldn't just not show up for work without notifying anyone. Since she didn't answer the phone, it was decided to contact her sister to find out what happened. After several unsuccessful attempts to contact her sister, she went to her house. No one answered the door, but Berylise had a spare key, so she got in without difficulty. However, she was met only by hungry animals who had not eaten anything for almost 24 hours. Now Berylise was already in a panic because she realized that something terrible or irreparable had happened to Kishla. She immediately called her mother and told her everything, and then reported to the police about her suspicions and threats to her sister. She also called Felix, but he claimed that he had spent the previous evening and night at home with his family and had not gone to any meeting. The missing girl's mother took the first flight from Florida to San Juan. She thought that her lover might have taken her daughter to a private clinic and paid for her to have an abortion without her consent. Kayla didn't even want to think about the fact that Kishla was no longer alive. The first thing to do was to question the missing girl's neighbors and co-workers, but they didn't notice anything suspicious and couldn't provide the investigation with any useful information. In parallel, messages about the disappearance of Rodriguez were posted on popular social networks with requests to respond to those who know anything about her fate or current whereabouts. The case quickly received wide publicity, and when it became known that the missing girl was in a long-term relationship with a famous athlete and was expecting a child from him, reporters literally lined up to interview any of Rodriguez's family members. The relatives did not hold anything back and spoke out about their suspicions, among other things, blaming Felix for the incident. On April 30th, Keishla's car was found abandoned on the east side of the city, with her documents and personal belongings inside. No signs of struggle were found in the interior, giving a faint hope of finding its owner alive. On May 1st, a passerby strolling on the bridge over the lagoon saw a strange shape resembling a human body in the shallow water. He reported his discovery to the police, who soon recovered from the water the body of a young woman, presumably the same one the whole city had been looking for several days. Members of the Rodriguez family, who arrived to identify the body, hoped to the last that it was not Keishla, but their hopes were not realized. The body had been in the water for several days and changed a lot. But the girl was immediately identified by a remarkable tattoo on her arm. When news of the gruesome discovery hit the press, the residents of the city revolted and began to go out to spontaneous rallies, demanding punishment for those responsible. The same day, Verdejo was detained and taken to the police station for questioning, but the athlete categorically denied his involvement and claimed that on the night of Keishla's disappearance, he was at home with his family. As there was nothing to charge him, Felix was released on his own recognizance. One of the key witnesses was the athlete's legal wife, who at the first interrogation admitted that she was aware of his affair with Keishla, but that she had heard about her rival's pregnancy for the first time. On top of that, she did not confirm her husband's alibi, saying that he was not at home on the night of the murder. The first thing investigators did was check traffic surveillance footage on the way to the bridge from which Keishla was thrown. That's how they found Felix's pickup truck and the victim's car traveling behind each other. But the Kia Forte was clearly not driven by its owner. On the same day, the boxer's car was seized for examination, and in its body they found some hair of the deceased. Luis was the first to surrender to the police, promising to tell the whole truth in exchange for a reduced sentence. Felix was also taken into custody, but he refused to cooperate with the investigation, did not answer questions, and continued to deny his guilt, despite the presence of irrefutable evidence. A firearm was seized from Felix, which he used to shoot the victim from the bridge, and for which he had an official permit. Also, a cell phone check confirmed the fact that Felix, Luis, and Keishla were in the same location on that fateful night. Keishla's final farewell was on May 8th, and the funeral ceremony was all over the national news. It was a kind of action, calling for the perpetrators of the tragedy to be punished to the full extent of the law, as well as an action to draw public attention to the problem of gender violence. The coffin with Rodriguez's body was brought to the cemetery, not in a traditional hearse, but in a white carriage, over which white flower petals were thrown from the air. Many famous Puerto Rican natives, including show business stars, athletes, politicians, and public figures, have spoken out about the high-profile incident. Verdejo was charged with carjacking, kidnapping, premeditated murder, and the murder of an unborn child. All of these crimes together carried the death penalty, but the relatives of the deceased from the very beginning asked the court to elect a sentence of life imprisonment for the killer, so that he would suffer in captivity for the rest of his life. The hearing was repeatedly postponed due to the worldwide coronavirus pandemic, but in the spring of 2021, the trial was held in virtual mode. The court found that the crime was committed by a group of persons by prior conspiracy and with particular cruelty against a pregnant woman. It was possible to reconstruct the chain of events of that night and the details of the crime, mainly thanks to the testimony of Luis, who did not deny his guilt. He admitted that it was he who, at the request of a friend, got the drug for injection and also brought a wire and a concrete block to get rid of the body. But Felix continued to insist on his non-involvement in the case, although his words could not seriously affect the situation. By the way, the wife of the boxer, who acted in court as a witness, almost immediately after the arrest of her husband filed for divorce and tried to abstract from what was happening, focusing on the development of his business and raising a young daughter. According to some reports, not so long ago, Elisa Santiago remarried. Elisa herself admitted in an interview that she repeatedly received anonymous calls and messages with death threats, as well as death wishes to her and even Miranda. Many considered it was the spouse of the athlete as the organizer of the crime, but no evidence was found. In the summer of 2023, it became known that the jury, having familiarized itself with all the evidence and heard the testimony of all the witnesses, was finally ready to announce the final verdict. Felix Verdejo and his accomplice Luis Cadiz were found guilty on each of the charges against them. But despite this, the killers have not yet been sentenced. The next court hearing is scheduled for mid-November 2023. Most likely, both men involved in the deaths of Keishla Rodriguez and her unborn child will likely go to prison for life, with no right to ever leave prison. In the early hours of July 7, 1985, 54-year-old Jane Anker Hilton was found beaten and stabbed to death. She was discovered in a bedroom at her employer's house, a house she moved into only the previous day, seeking refuge from a troubled marriage. Jane was discovered by two fellow housemates and her own daughter, Autumn. The murder made no sense, and the case dragged for 14 years. Until two new detectives reopened the cold case in 1999. A misquote in an article led investigators to point the finger at Ricky Davis. Davis was eventually tried for the crime and convicted, all the while proclaiming his innocence. Determined not to give up, he sought help from the same justice system that put him behind bars. 15 years later, Davis was exonerated and the real killer found thanks to genetic genealogy testing and the determination of a group called the Innocence Project, who were determined to find the truth. Jane was a familiar face around El Dorado Hills, California. She was a columnist for Foothill Times. She often covered social events in and around town for the paper. Jane had 6 children whom she loved and often wrote poetry to help inspire them daily. She'd been working toward getting her real estate license and was married to Archie Hilton in 1984. However, by July 1985, their marriage started to fall apart. It was then she asked her employer, Wilma Klein, for assistance. Klein owned a fairly large home in El Dorado Hills. With her lived her daughter, Maureen Klein, and her boyfriend. Wilma's grandson, Ricky Davis, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl, also occupied a room at the house. On July 6, 1985, Wilma welcomed Jane and her youngest daughter, 13-year-old Autumn Anker, into her home. By all accounts, it was a full house. The first night of her new life would prove to be the night her life ended. At 3:30 a.m., Ricky Davis, then 20, and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Connie Dahl, returned from a party to find Autumn lingering about outside. She told them she was out late and afraid her mother was going to be angry. All three made their way into the house. There was blood in the hallway. It was silent as they reached the first room, belonging to Maureen, Ricky's mother. On the bed was the bloody body of Jane Hilton. She was not breathing. Maureen and her boyfriend had gone on a camping trip and were not home at the time. Ricky and Connie called 911. Paramedics and police arrived, but Jane was pronounced dead at the scene. She had suffered 29 stab wounds, was beaten and bitten on her shoulder. It was a senseless murder, and investigators began to interview those closest to Jane. Archie Hilton, Jane's estranged husband, was interviewed and provided detectives with a solid alibi and DNA. Archie had been the logical choice as he and Jane had been going through a rough patch. He, however, said that the marriage was not over and that there was no trouble between them. He was cleared and all leaves went cold. Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl both told investigators they arrived home in the early morning hours and found Autumn waiting outside. When they entered the house, they found the hallway carpet bloody. The blood trail led them to the master bedroom where they found Jane lying dead on the bloodied mattress. They speculated that an intruder may have been responsible for the murder. For 14 years, the case remained unsolved. The cold case reopened in 1999. El Dorado County Sheriff's detectives Richard Strasser and Rick Fitzgerald were tasked with the investigation. After poring over paperwork, they zoomed in on a news article. Connie Dahl, former girlfriend of Ricky Davis and housemate Jane Hilton, had given an interview to a reporter. She was quoted saying Hilton's body was lying in bed like someone placed her there in the position she would normally sleep in. This statement seemed to contradict a muffled audio recording of a statement that Davis had previously made. Detective Fitzgerald falsely thought he heard him say the body was found on the floor. Dahl was, at the time, serving a jail sentence in Oregon on unrelated charges. Detectives brought her in for an interview and began a 3-hour-long interrogation. Initially, Dahl stuck to her original story. Over the next 18 months, though, she would be interrogated 4 times. Detectives were found to have used techniques known to increase the chances of a false confession. Dahl was systematically forced into incriminating Davis and Jane's daughter Autumn in the murder. Dahl was threatened with a charge of murder. If she cooperated, though, she would be given a lenient sentence of manslaughter and serve only a year. Detectives Strasser and Fitzgerald told Dahl that DNA evidence was going to be used to trace the suspect. In truth, no DNA evidence was brought into the case during that period. In truth, testing had not been done on the DNA recovered from the scene. By showing a crime scene photos and using facts from the crime, such as the bike mark on Jane's shoulder, investigators sped Dahl the information they wanted to hear. Over the course of the 4 interviews, Dahl was starting to break. She began remembering facts from the crowd. This in turn allowed her to fabricate and create an entirely different account of events from the night of the murder. In one interview, Dahl said that Autumn was present during the murder of Jane and was sprayed with blood. In another, she confessed that she was probably the person that bit Jane on the shoulder. Dahl would say that the murder began with an argument between Davis and Jane. She alleged that Davis wanted Autumn to join them at a party. When Jane refused, Davis erupted in a fit of anger, leading to the death of Jane. Her story kept changing to fit the facts being fed. However, she couldn't remember the weapon used for the murder or where it was eventually hidden. Dahl had implicated her ex-boyfriend Davis in the murder of Jane Hilton. He was now the prime suspect. Ricky Davis and Autumn Anker were also interviewed following the confession of Connie Dahl. Both Davis and Anker stuck to their original accounts of the crime. Detectives again lied to Davis, telling him that Anker had also implicated him in the murder. Anker told detectives she had no reason to protect Davis when they threatened her with culpability regarding the murder. Despite their interrogation techniques, detectives could not sway Davis or Anker to change their stories. They therefore used the confession of Dahl to arrest Davis. Dahl was offered a plea bargain to testify against Davis at his trial. Davis's first trial was declared a mistrial by jurors. His second, in 2005, would eventually convict him. Dahl took the stand and testified against Davis. She told the court of how she struggled with Jane and she herself accidentally bit the victim on the shoulder. She went on to say that she went outside as Davis continued the bloody assault on Hilton. Dahl said she could hear screaming, pleading, and gurgling as Davis continued the brutal attack. Based entirely on the testimony of Dahl's account of events, Davis was sentenced to 16 years in prison for the second-degree murder of Jane Hilton. Dahl received a lesser charge of manslaughter and received a year-long sentence at the county jail. Dahl, though, would eventually die from a drug overdose in 2014. Meanwhile, Davis was not going down without a fight. He maintained his innocence and in 2006 made contact with the Northern California Innocence Project. He asked if they could help him prove that he was wrongly convicted. The NCIP was founded in 2001 by Kathleen Rodolphe and Linda Starr. The project began after legislation offered convicted inmates to seek DNA testing to prove their innocence. It's a non-profit clinical program of Santa Clara University's School of Law. After Davis made contact with the NCIP in 2006, his case was put through a thorough re-examination. Cooperation between the NCIP and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office allowed for the DNA recovered from the crime scene to be retested post-conviction. Evidence from the crime scene included Hilton's nightgown and biological material found under her fingernails. The results revealed an unknown male DNA profile. DNA from Hilton's fingernails and nightgown were both found to be from the same source. Test results eliminated Davis, Dahl, and Anker. This proved Dahl's testimony was contradictory to the physical evidence and therefore had to have been fabricated. The DNA also proved Archie Hilton innocent. Unfortunately, he had passed away by the time results were released. The DNA profile file was entered into the FBI Combined Index DNA System, CODIS, but no matches were found. Although the evidence seemed to prove Davis's consistent claim of innocence correct, there were some hurdles that still needed to be jumped. The NCIP successfully argued that had the DNA results been presented to the jury during Davis's trial, the outcome would be different. However, until January 2017, the California standard required that new evidence point unerringly to innocence. It was considered an almost unattainable standard. In 2015, a false confession expert, Richard Leo, reviewed transcripts of Dahl's interrogations. Leo concluded that the methods used by detectives during the interrogation of Dahl were designed to pressure and persuade Dahl to adopt an account that matched the detectives' pre-existing beliefs about how and why the murder of Jane Hilton occurred. In 2016, though, the NCIP co-sponsored Senate Bill 1134. This bill allowed wrongfully convicted inmates, like Davis, to prove that new evidence would likely have been compelling to a jury. NCIP attorney Melissa O'Connell filed a petition for a new trial based on the new DNA evidence testing. Championed by former California State Senator Martha Leno, the bill was passed in January 2017, putting California's standard in line with about 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malikian vacated Davis's 2005 conviction and ordered a new trial. Initially set to start in fall of 2019, however, the judge announced the trial would take place in April 2020, citing the defense attorney's health as the catalyst for change in date. However, the fate of the trial was about to change once again. Advancements in DNA testing led to Davis becoming the first convicted person in California and the second in the United States to be exonerated for a crime. Genetic genealogy is a fairly new DNA testing concept. It involves taking DNA evidence from a crime scene and sending them to genetic companies. These companies then search family tree databases to find a potential match. In February 2020, DNA evidence matched to a man considered an unlikely suspect. El Dorado County Attorney Vern Pearson announced in February 2020 that a new suspect had been identified as the man linked to the DNA evidence found on Jane Hilton's body. Following the arrest, many people spoke to the media about the man they knew as Michael Green. Green was a longtime resident of Roseville, California. He graduated from Oakmount High School in 1986. He was described as an easygoing, kind person, even-tempered, and even super chill. One classmate who wanted to remain anonymous could not understand why Green would go to El Dorado Hills and brutally murder a woman. According to reports, Green was 17 years old at the time of Hilton's murder. On the night of July 6, 1985, the victim's daughter, Autumn, met Green and two of his friends, Calvin and Stephen. They hung out together at the park when Autumn decided to go home and have a shower before returning. Allegedly, Autumn told her mother she was going to another friend's house for the evening. Instead, she returned to the park to join the boys. What happened next is pure speculation. Investigators believe that during this time, Green broke into the house and was confronted by Jane. In a struggle to get away, Green may have attacked her in a frenzy. Following the attack, Jane's body was discovered by Davis, Dahl, and Otto when they returned home. Green had no criminal convictions either before or after the murder. It seems he'd led a normal life until DNA linked him to the gruesome crime. The other two boys who were with Green were tracked down shortly after his arrest. Calvin, unfortunately, had died some time ago. Stephen, however, was found and interviewed the day after the arrest. He was being treated as a witness and not a participant. Green was arrested on February 11, 2020. Since Green was a teenager at the time of the murder, he made his first appearance at the juvenile court on February 19, 2020. District Attorney Vern Pearson said that, procedurally, the court has to go through some steps on the juvenile side of it. Following this, Green was granted a transfer so that he could be tried as an adult. He waited 2.5 years before he would be tried in court. Green pleaded no contest on July 29, 2022. This plea means Green gave up his right to a jury trial. A jury trial meant he was to face a charge of first-degree murder. He also gave up his chance to challenge the plea or the consequences of his decision. His sentencing date was set for September 27, 2022, to be presided over by Judge Suzanne Kingsbury. At sentencing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a professor in psychological science education, was called in on educational capacity to explain to the court the development of an adolescent. Kaufman's research explained the varying development needs of adolescents with regard to emotional and cognitive development. The late adolescent stage allowed an individual to understand right from wrong, yet at the same time, they're also functioning under diminished capacity for impulse control. The defense called several witnesses from Green's childhood, some who even maintained relationships with him into adulthood. Each witness was asked if their opinion had changed of him since the knowledge of his confession. All witnesses agreed they'd been shocked to discover that he was responsible for the murder of Hilton. Individuals who knew him in varying capacities described him as jovial, popular, funny, and loving. These words were used to describe him before and after the murder. Green's ex-wife, Karen Green, said, "There's just not a bad bone in Mike." After witness statements were given, each of Jane Hilton's children presented their victim impact statements. They all described the unforgivable loss that Green inflicted upon their family. The why it happened and how different my life could have been will haunt me forever, said Heather Purvis McConnell, one of Jane's daughters. Argith Brandon, Hilton's fourth child, said, "I loved my mother, and I assume Michael loves his mother too. I want to know what he would feel or what he would say to the person who stabbed your mother 29 times. What would you do if you received an early morning call to tell you your mother is dead?" The court listened to her description of the feeling of gathering her mother's belongings from the house in which she was killed. Ardith finished with a powerful declaration. "We will always have something in common, regretting the stupid decision you made 37 years ago." Hilton's son Ian echoed his sister's sentiments. He went on to explain the uncertainty the family faced and the recurring nightmares they suffered, especially after the crooked finger of blame was pointed at his own sister, Autumn. He broke down in tears as he ended with an almost inaudible remark. "All the words we say will never bring my mother back." Autumn was the last to speak. Her statement showed true agony as she recounted the cloud of suspicion she'd lived under for the last 2 decades. Recounting the day 2 crew-cut thick-mustached detectives came into her house telling her they found the people responsible for her mother's death, she was then repeatedly accused of biting her mother and helping move her body from the floor to the bed. Autumn went on to say that if she hadn't said the word lawyer at that point, she did not know how much further the intimidation tactics of the investigators could have gone. Afterwards, Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family. In the statement, he asked Green what made him end Jane's life in such a brutal manner. "You beat her. She had numerous wounds around her head and face. By your own words, you kicked her jaw. You bit her on the shoulder. Why was that?" Linden continued to read the statement that expressed how Green didn't just murder Jane, he destroyed numerous lives in the process. Linden then asked Green if he'd given any thought about Jane and who she was. He pointed out her achievements and the love she had for each of her children. In closing arguments, Margaret Husher, Green's defense attorney, stressed the idea that he was unable to stop himself. She emphasized that he did not know what he was doing was wrong, as he was an adolescent at the time. This argument was based on the testimony of expert witness Dr. Kaufman. She asked that the court show mercy as she read off the multiple penal codes and rules of the court. Judge Kingsbury interjected by saying, "The court is not going to put him on probation," effectively ending any further comment from the defense. In response, Linden thanked the court and said the application for probation was offensive. He said, "It was a smack to this family who had endured this for decades." Linden stated that he already got away with murder for 37 years. Placing him on probation allowed him to get away with more. Judge Kingsbury said she had heard a multitude of arguments about murder cases surrounding adolescent development. She remarked that after her 26 years on the bench, Jane Hilton's murder was by far the most brutal. Before passing her sentence, Kingsbury asked the family for their forgiveness for the trauma they had suffered, although she was not originally assigned the case. She also hoped they would heal from the pain, as it would have been their mother's wish. Kingsbury then encouraged Green to use all resources at his disposal in the California Department of Rehabilitation. "You're the key to the questions these people have. Doing that could ultimately help you with your outcome as it relates to parole," said Kingsbury. In closing, Kingsbury pointed out that she had heard from his friends that there's a great side to him and that he has much to offer. She also said he was young enough to be released and live a productive life. Green was sentenced to 15 years to life and remanded to the El Dorado County Jail. He will then be transferred to the California Department of Rehabilitation. Restitution will be decided after further consideration by the court. Davis was released on February 13, 2020, and planned to celebrate over pizza with his family. His lawyer, Melissa O'Connell, said he will be entitled to more than $750,000 in state compensation for the wrongful conviction. Although the amount was high enough for him to re-enter society and start afresh, O'Connell said it could not make up for the years of freedom that he lost. Davis went on to sue the state for damages covering the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020, for a whopping $18 million. The lawsuit names El Dorado County, as well as former detectives Richard Strasser, Rick Fitzgerald, Bill Wilson, who's deceased and being sued through his estate, and Larry Hennig. Sheriff's Office pathologist Dr. Robert Anthony has also been included in the complaint. A Village Life newspaper reported that Davis was homeless after being released. The lawsuit is still pending as of 2022. In September 2022, California passed Assembly Bill 2644. This bill would, commencing January 1, 2024, prohibit law enforcement officers from employing threats, physical harm, deception, or psychological manipulative interrogation tactics, as specified during a custodial interrogation of a person 17 years of age or younger. The bill faced opposition, but District Attorney Van Pearson is urging all law enforcement to stop using intimidation tactics. Pearson stated that 10 years ago, he would have viewed the methods used to get a confession differently. However, after seeing the true impact it can have, he believed there is room for change. This also comes after research points to deceptive tactics being used for years by law enforcement that will presume guilt and focus on getting a confession rather than getting the full story. The district attorney is implementing this new policy in his office and is urging other district attorneys to do the same. El Dorado County DA's office will now reject any case where the primary evidence is a confession obtained using threats, lies, or psychological manipulation interrogation tactics. These measures are to ensure that no one is ever again convicted based on a coerced false confession like the case of Ricky Davis. Pearson personally apologized to all involved in the miscarriage of justice caused by the tactics used by Ben investigators into the brutal 1985 murder of Jane Hilton. After 37 years, the right man is finally facing justice. Yet the lives of so many were left broken by mistakes and false accusations. For Jane Hilton's family, hopefully they can now pick up the pieces after being divided over the innocence of their own sister, Autumn. Ricky Davis can never regain the liberty he lost. And Michael Green destroyed not only the lives of the victim's family and friends, but the lives that he touched in the years before and after the murder. What are your thoughts on today's case? Did Michael Green deserve the sentence he received? Does his clean record, minus the murder, make him innocent of intentional murder? How could he let an innocent man take the blame for his actions? Can Ricky Davis ever get his life back on track even when he does receive compensation? And why is it taking so long? The Case of Matthew Winkler, Secrets of a Religious Family. Sometimes the most horrible and unpredictable crimes are committed in seemingly perfect families. Of course, even in the most prosperous unit of society can come crisis, which will be unnoticed by others, but literally poison the lives of all members of the family and eventually lead to tragedy. The Winklers, in the town of Selmer, were considered by many to be a model family. The young pastor, his wife, and their 3 daughters looked happy, had everything they needed for a comfortable life, were healthy and successful, but in a quiet pool, as they say. In this case, many questions remained unanswered because we heard only one version of what happened. And the story itself became the subject of the book, Sex and Murder: Secrets of a Pastor. March 22, 2006, the small town of Selmer, Tennessee, shook the terrible news. A 31-year-old pastor named Matthew Winkler was brutally murdered in his own home, and his wife Mary and their 3 daughters, 8-year-old Patricia, 6-year-old Maria Eliza, and 1-year-old Brianna, disappeared without a trace. That day, the preacher of the Church of Christ did not show up for the evening service where he was supposed to attend with his family. This circumstance seemed strange and suspicious, because Matthew was always very responsible and could not miss the planned event without informing anyone. None of the family members also answered the phone, which was even more disturbing. Alarmed community members decided to go to the Winklers' residence to find out what had happened and if they needed help. From the outside, the house looked normal. The windows and doors were intact, and nothing suspicious was visible. Inside, there were lights on in several rooms, and they could hear a television playing quite loudly in one of the rooms. It gave the impression that the owners of the house were busy doing their own thing. The front door was locked, but no one answered the knock. Phone calls also went unanswered, and through the curtained windows, it was impossible to see what was going on inside or if anyone was there. However, even though the whole situation was quite strange, no one was in a hurry to call the police. Instead, a call was made to an elder of the religious community, who advised them to look for a spare key and open the door themselves. It took another hour and a half, and when members of the community were finally able to get inside the house, they found an eerie scene. Everything in the house was in its place. There was no sign of intruders, but the owners were nowhere to be seen either. Everything seemed normal until the visitors looked into the marital bedroom. There on the floor, in a pool of his own blood, lay the pastor's body. There was a huge hole in his back from a gunshot wound. Blood spattered everywhere, and bloody foam dried on his face. By then, the body had already cooled and stiffened. It was obvious that Matthew had been lying there for many hours and had probably been killed in the morning because he was dressed in his pajamas. It was only after this that a call was made to the police. By the time the police arrived, a whole crowd of neighbors, churchgoers, and casual passers-by had gathered in and around the house, interested in what was going on. All of these people had left their fingerprints at the crime scene. They left their fingerprints and shoe prints, erased or trampled possible evidence, greatly complicating the work of investigators. The police took the body for forensic examination and found that the pastor was killed by a single shot in the back, fired from a large caliber weapon. He died a few minutes after the wound, from massive blood loss, unable to call for help. It was simply impossible to establish definitively whether there were any strangers in the house at that time, because the people who had arrived before the police arrived had literally destroyed all traces of them. The picture of the crime was quite strange, and those who could shed any light on what happened disappeared. The fate of the wife and daughters of the murdered man remained unknown. The police assumed that the woman and children could have been kidnapped or also killed. By the way, the family minivan Winklers also disappeared from the garage. A massive search was launched and the state issued a yellow alert. This meant that children were missing, and all citizens were asked to be vigilant and assist in the search. But let's break this whole story down from the beginning. Matthew Bryan Winkler was born in 1974, November 21st, in the picturesque country town of Henderson, Tennessee, and was the youngest of 3 sons of Dan and Diane Winkler. Our hero and his 2 older brothers, James and Daniel, grew up in a rather conservative Christian family. Their parents were very religious and brought up their sons in strictness and obedience. It is worth noting that Matthew became a minister of the church in the 5th generation. His father, great-uncle Michael, grandfather Wendell, great-grandfather Merlin Winkler, and great-great-grandfather Merlin Paul Winkler Sr. were all preachers of the gospel at one time. The father, to top it all off, ran the local preacher's school and was a man respected and influential in his hometown. In their younger years, the Winkler brothers attended Sunday school and were active in church activities. In addition, Matthew in high school was seriously interested in soccer, and everyone who saw his game on the field noted that he had talent, and he could well become an outstanding athlete of world renown. However, later the young man decided to sacrifice a promising sports career in favor of Bible study and church ministry. Since the preaching activity of the head of the family was associated with frequent travel, his wife and children almost always followed him. Because of this, Matthew changed several schools in his childhood, but the active, communicative, and friendly child quickly made friends and gained authority everywhere. When the boy finished school, his family lived in a small city called Austin, located in the state of Texas. Matthew was a creative person, had a powerful charisma, but here are some outstanding achievements in studies could not boast. After graduating from high school, he entered the college Fried Hardeman and successfully completed it. In parallel, the young man began to try his hand as a pastor, under the careful guidance of his father. Matthew was the youth minister of the Central Church of Christ in the city of McMinnville. He was later appointed to the preaching position at the 4th Street Church of Christ in Selmer, Tennessee. Mary Carol Winkler, maiden name Freeman, was born in December 1973 in Geist Township, Tennessee, and was the oldest of 2 daughters to her parents. She was also raised in a deeply religious family, with strict rules. The head of the family for many years served as a pastor in the Christian church, where the girl attended Sunday school. A few years later, a second daughter was born to the family and named Patricia. Unfortunately, the girl was born prematurely and had a number of serious health problems, including cerebral palsy, encephalitis, epilepsy, and mental retardation. For many years, the parents did not want to put up with the disappointing diagnoses of the child and desperately tried to treat her, agreeing even to experimental therapy. However, it did not bring any particular improvement. Mary tenderly loved her little sister, always treated her with awe and cared for her as best she could. But in 1987, when 10-year-old Patricia was bathing in the bathtub, her older sister was only a minute away to take something from the bathing accessories, and at that very moment, the girl had another epileptic seizure. When Mary returned to the room, her sister was no longer breathing, and all attempts to resuscitate her had come to nothing. For a 13-year-old girl, it was a huge shock and the first loss in her life. She blamed herself for the tragedy and was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Teachers who saw the deplorable state of Mary sent her to the school psychologist, working with whom she helped. But her father, learning about what was happening, made a scandal and forbade his daughter to go to these sessions, saying that such problems are discussed only within the family. In fact, the girl never received real moral support from her parents. Mary grew up modest and quite shy. She tried to avoid any conflicts, and after the tragic death of her little sister, she became withdrawn. Since her father did not allow her to seek help from a specialist, the trauma over the years has resulted in serious psychological problems. After the death of Patricia, the parents decided to adopt a little girl named Charlotte, who was from a dysfunctional large family. Soon the couple was also allowed to take custody of Charlotte's 2 brothers and sister, so the family was reunited in their new home. Mary was once again the older sister and took care of the younger children while helping her mother. Matthew and Mary Winkler, family life. The future spouses met soon after Matthew graduated from high school. The guy was prominent, handsome, athletic, and enjoyed great popularity with the opposite sex. But to spin novels right and left, he did not allow a strict religious upbringing. The young people immediately developed a liking for each other, which quickly grew into love. For both of them, it was the first strong feeling in their lives, and after a couple of months they met each other's parents, and having received their blessing, began to plan a wedding. In April 1994, the lovers got married. When the family had an older daughter, Patricia, the head of the family was still in college and was forced to leave school for a while. He took a job at a construction site But long there did not last, because he was not used to hard physical labor. During this period, for the first time, made himself aware of the difficult character of Matthew. He was often angry with others, irritated at small things, and sometimes he could not control his anger. But Mary tried not to complain, and not to tell anyone about what was happening in her family. A meek young woman, brought up in the spirit of patriarchy, obeyed her husband in everything. At first, the Winklers lived near the house of Mary's parents, so she was able to see them regularly. But soon Mrs. Freeman was diagnosed with cancer, which rapidly progressed, and in just a few months she literally burned from the disease. It was another shock for Mary, and the care of her underage siblings now fell on her shoulders. The situation was further complicated by the fact that Mary was pregnant again at that time. But soon after the birth of their second daughter, the family moved to another city, where they bought their own small house. After the move, Mary was completely absorbed in the care of the baby, and almost stopped communicating with her father, as well as with younger brothers and sisters, who were too demanding and constantly needed attention. In addition, the young mother began to suffer from severe postpartum depression. Everyone who was closely acquainted with the family Winkler noted some oddities in the character and behavior of Mary. The young woman was characterized as an introvert and even sociophobic. She did not communicate with anyone. It was difficult for her to make new acquaintances, much less friendships. She suffered from mood swings, was prone to melancholy, and any little thing could bring her to tears. While Matthew was building his career as a pastor, his wife became increasingly withdrawn. The situation became even more complicated when Mary once again became pregnant, and a few months later, she learned that the fetus had died in her womb. Such news strongly shook Mary, who was looking forward to the appearance of this child, and very much dreamed of a large, friendly family. Again, to see the long-awaited 2 stripes on the pregnancy test she could only 2 years later, and her happiness was unbounded. This time, Mary hid her pregnancy for a long time, as if afraid of something. She did so until her situation became obvious. Once again, everyone began to talk about Mary's strange behavior and pathological reticence. The strange behavior of Mrs. Winkler was associated not only with a severe psychological trauma she suffered in childhood, but also with a very unhealthy environment within her own family, which only undermined her already unstable nervous system. The head of the family was a man of authority and demanded unconditional obedience. Despite the fact that in public the Winklers looked like an ideal married couple, where there was trust, mutual respect, and harmony, in reality, their neighbors have repeatedly heard how the husband shouted and snapped at his wife for no apparent reason. No one could even imagine that a respected pastor could raise a hand on his wife until one day Mary had a huge black eye. Despite the fact that she denied the fact of domestic violence and said that it was an accident, the city quickly spread rumors about the cruelty of a young preacher who beats the mother of his children. In addition, Matthew at some point developed an irresistible urge to experiment in bed. He offered his wife to diversify their intimate life with role-playing games, adult toys, and so on. But for Mary, brought up in strictness, with conservative views, such was unacceptable. She strongly restricted her husband in this, which infuriated him, and he repeatedly tried to get what he wanted by force. One day, after another abuse in bed, Mary called her only close friend in tears and complained to her about the situation. The friend, who promised to keep her secret, immediately blabbed about everything, which provoked a new wave of rumors and gossip about the unacceptable behavior of the clergyman. At that time, Matthew was up for promotion and aspired to be a local church leader, but he was rejected because of rapidly spreading unpleasant rumors about him. Moreover, he was also removed from his position in the Sunday school, where he had brought God's word to the children and was in good standing. This was requested by the parents, who had also heard about the pastor's peculiar predilections. All this forced the family to leave their residence and move to another city where they planned to start over. They settled in Selmer, where they quickly gained the love and respect of those around them. Matthew took a job as a church pastor again, and his wife found a part-time job to make a small contribution to the family income. And although the family was still not smooth, their neighbors, as well as the congregation of the church where Matthew preached, considered Mary and Matthew an ideal couple, and their family a model. Next door to the Winkler family lived a young married couple, with whom the couple quickly became friends. They often visited each other, celebrated holidays together, shared news and secrets. A few months before the tragedy, during a joint dinner at the pastor's house, Mary bragged to the neighbors that her husband had bought her a gun for self-defense, and had already taken her to the shooting range several times to learn how to handle it confidently. Mary turned out to be quite a capable student, quickly mastered all the subtleties, and accurately shot at targets. Moreover, it turned out that the Winklers already had firearms in the house, which had been purchased by the pastor earlier, also for self-defense. The guests wondered why the pastor and his wife needed all this, because they live in a quiet town where they have no enemies, and everyone around them loves and respects their family. After another move of the couple, their financial situation left much to be desired. Mary was in search of various part-time jobs, and she also decided to get a medical degree to then get a job in a clinic and help sick children. Soon, Mary decided to improve the financial condition of their family through financial fraud. She herself later claimed that she did not realize that she was doing something illegal and was going to pay back all the money as soon as she got back on her feet. What Mary was doing is commonly referred to as artificially inflating account balances. Mrs. Winkler also received checks from unspecified sources and then deposited them into a bank account she and her husband owned. She then changed the address of the account so that all communications would be routed there. The total amount of checks she received was almost $17,000, which aroused certain suspicions of the bank employees, who decided to invite the couple to the office branch to clarify the circumstances and resolve the situation. But the pastor and his wife never showed up at the bank, and this aroused even more suspicion. It was assumed that Matthew was not aware of what his wife was doing at all. However, after Matthew's death, his wife tried to prove in court that the whole story of fraud was his idea, and that it was he who forced her to make dubious transactions, while he himself remained in the shadows, without arousing suspicion. Where has Mary disappeared to? When Mr. Winkler was found murdered in his own home, his wife and daughters were put on the wanted list, fearing that they too might be in mortal danger. Initially, the meek, shy, and homely Mary was initially viewed solely as a possible victim of the crime. However, after talking to neighbors and receiving information from the bank about financial fraud, she became the main suspect in the murder of her own husband. It was necessary to find out as soon as possible where Mary had disappeared to, where the children were, and if they were all right. They, as well as their family car, were put on the wanted list. Attempts were also made to trace transactions made from Mary's bank card and to locate her location through her cell phone signal. Mary was found just a day later in an Alabama resort town where she and her children were having fun at a local amusement park. It was as if the mother wanted to give her children one last party, realizing that she would soon be going to prison and would see her girls very soon. When the family was taken to the police station to testify, the two older daughters confidently told the same story. According to them, intruders broke into the house and injured their dad, and their mom picked up a gun to protect them. They were then forced to run for their lives. According to the girls, their father was alive and in the hospital, and they were soon to go and see him and return home. What exactly happened in the house, as it turned out, Patricia and Maria Eliza did not see, and learned about the events from the words of their mother. They only heard a gunshot and glimpsed their father lying on the floor, and then their mother put them in the car, and they drove away. Mary almost immediately began to confess, but she claimed that she could not reconstruct the entire chain of events of that day, referring to the temporary blur. According to her, her spouse had abused her for years, humiliating her and inducing her to forms of intimacy that were unacceptable to her. Mary insisted that it was he who had initiated the financial scam she had perpetrated. Matthew demanded total obedience, easily lost his temper, and once gave the will of his fists. This was confirmed by Matthew's secretary at his previous place of employment. The woman repeatedly witnessed how the pastor insulted his wife, who carefully brought him lunch to church, but he was always dissatisfied with something. The evening before the tragedy, there was another scandal in the family, because of which the spouses went to bed in separate rooms. Mary cried all night, and in the morning she did not realize how in her hands was a shotgun, which her husband kept loaded. She entered Matthew's room and shot him in the back while he was still lying in bed. Matthew collapsed to the floor, bloody foam oozing from his mouth and nose. According to Mary, her husband, while still alive, whispered, "Why?" To which she replied, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Mary then took her daughters and left the house, and her husband, as experts have established, tried to reach for the phone to call for help, but he no longer had the strength to do so. By the way, the weapon of crime was found in the trunk of the car on which Mary left with the children. For what purpose she took it with her, Mrs. Winkler also could not answer. At the trial, the role-playing costumes found in their home were presented as evidence of the pastor's humiliation and moral abuse of his wife. Upon seeing them, Mary turned pale and then became hysterical. Despite the fact that she confused her testimony and told several different versions of what happened, the court agreed that she was the victim of a domestic tyrant, and the murder was the result of years of anger, resentment, and pain. However, this did not absolve Mary of responsibility for what she had done. In April 2007, the court delivered its final verdict in this complicated and confusing case. Mrs. Winkler was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but her mental state raised many questions. It was originally expected that the young woman would be sent to prison for at least 6 years, but in the end, she was given a sentence of less than 1 year. She spent 2 months of that sentence in a psychiatric hospital, where experts were trying to determine whether she could regain custody of her children upon release. In the summer of 2008, Mary was given sole custody of her daughters, who all this time lived with their paternal grandparents. Matthew's parents were extremely upset by this circumstance. They believed that their daughter-in-law had deliberately killed their son and suffered virtually no punishment for it, and now their granddaughters were given full custody of her. However, all their numerous attempts to file appeals had failed. As for the fraud case, it never went to trial. The bank never filed formal charges, and the whole story was dropped. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Siobhan McLaughlin. On February 28, 2006, McLaughlin was found deceased in a locked bedroom at her residence in Nakanishi Goldstown, Dublin 14. At first, it appeared as if she had tragically taken her own life, but within hours, the members of the McLaughlin family were convinced that she had been brutally murdered. Siobhan was one of 8 children, 7 girls and 1 boy, born to her parents, Oon and Deja McLaughlin. Siobhan worked as a chef in the canteen of an electrical firm. In 1989, at the age of 21, she met a man named Brian Carney, who was 31 years old. Brian worked as an electrical engineer for the same firm, which was a very good job. Siobhan lived in an apartment, while Brian lived with his toddler daughter, Aisling, from a previous relationship. Brian's wife and the mother of his child had passed away from natural causes a few years before Siobhan and him met. Brian was raising his daughter alone. Eventually, Siobhan would move in with Brian and his daughter. They renovated this house and then decided to sell it. Siobhan decided to set up her own catering business, as she had trained at the Shelburne Hotel, and she was ahead of her time when it came to food. She used ingredients that were uncommon in Ireland during the 90s, but would now be considered standard. The era of meat and potatoes had passed. Brian was not only an electrical engineer, but he also owned a music shop called Music City, which he sold in 2005. In 1995, the couple got engaged, but then split up. They did keep in touch with each other over the years, meeting for dinner every few months. While they were separated, Brian never entered into any other relationship, and eventually they reconciled. In January 2002, they got married, and Siobhan was expecting a baby. Their son, Daniel, was born 6 months later. That same year, Brian and Siobhan traveled to Spain on holidays, with the prospect of buying a boat. But while there, they came across a 200-year-old merchant's mansion on the island of Mallorca in Spain. They bought it and converted it into a boutique hotel. It had 6 luxury bedrooms and a heated outdoor pool. The couple bought the property for €2.5 million and oversaw most of the renovations themselves. Siobhan was a visionary, traveling from place to place, collecting pieces for the hotel, along with her impeccable taste and furnishings. Siobhan's culinary skills were what would make the hotel a success. The hotel opened in January 2003, and Siobhan's barbecues quickly became a highlight of guest stays and were popular among the locals. Siobhan and Brian would regularly travel back and forth between Mallorca and Ireland. However, during the holiday season, which spanned from March to December, Brian would travel back to Ireland more frequently. This meant that Siobhan was left in charge of running the business in Mallorca while also raising their son, Daniel. Later, people who knew Siobhan would say that towards the end, they could see that she was not happy and was exhausted from doing everything. They felt there was an atmosphere of tension when Brian was around. However, because Javon's family was so large, Siobhan would frequently receive visits from one or a few of them, and she was very glad to see them. These visits seemed to lift her spirits and put a pep in her step. Siobhan was very independent, but she also greatly valued the closeness of her family. A few years into owning the property in Spain, Brian and Siobhan decided to build a new house beside their property in Dublin, hoping to sell the original house and move into the new house or rent out either of the properties. Siobhan came home to Dublin for the break. In 2006, she consulted a lawyer about legally separating and what she had to do. The solicitor advised her to keep a diary of the goings-on between herself and Brian. She enrolled their son Daniel in a local school and was going to approach Brian about her and their son moving into the new house that was being built next door. While Siobhan loved what she had built out there, she was very much on her own, overworked and trying to raise their son with no family around her for support. On the morning of Tuesday, the 28th of February 2006, it was Brian's birthday. Siobhan's sister Niamh arrived at Siobhan's house as usual. While she normally arrived at 9 a.m. to leave her car in the driveway and catch the bus into the city, this morning she did not arrive until 9:30 a.m. As she had her own key, she let herself into the house and found 3-year-old Daniel wandering around on his own downstairs. Niamh then went upstairs to Siobhan's bedroom door and found it was locked. There was no reply when she called her name. Niamh then called her father and mother and informed them of the situation. When the father arrived, he broke down the door and found Siobhan lying in the bedroom near the ensuite door. Owen reached down and touched Siobhan on the head and then the leg and found she was cold. He knew then that his beloved daughter was dead. She was only 38 years old. The key to the bedroom was found on the floor, just inches away from the main bedroom door, and it appeared to have been pushed under. Owen immediately contacted the Garda, Irish police. When they arrived and examined the scene, they felt it was staged. Photos had been placed around Siobhan, almost like a shrine. A cord was partially wrapped around Siobhan, and the cord had been broken. When the forensic team arrived and examined the scene, they found indentations at the top of the ensuite door, and the other part of the vacuum cord was wrapped around the door handle on the inside of the door, making it look like she had tried to hang herself. It later emerged in court that the cord would have snapped within 5 seconds due to Siobhan's weight, and she would have had to have been at least 6 inches off the ground. These two factors, combined with other evidence, indicated that it was impossible for Siobhan to have taken her own life. It was also determined that Siobhan had been dead for a few hours, as rigor mortis had already set in. The Garda imposed a 2-day media blackout on the case and advised the family not to speak to the press. After Siobhan's killing, it was said that the Garda took this step to try and avoid publicity of the case, and to prevent a repeat of what had happened in the Rachel O'Reilly case 18 months earlier, where no charges had yet been brought. The blackout was lifted when Brian's mother-in-law informed him of Siobhan's passing. The McLaughlin family gathered, united in grief, while Brian received little sympathy, his sister offering consolation. The family referred to Siobhan by her maiden name, evidently privy to information unknown to others. Brian was extensively questioned. Could he leave, only to be told he had to speak to the detectives first? He also questioned whether they would want the clothes he was wearing, which was strange. Brian was eventually allowed to leave after speaking with the detectives. And he did not hand over the clothes for testing, as he had asked for a specific item of clothing from the back bedroom to change into. The police officers did not want to give him these clothes. So they let him leave with the clothes he was wearing. He went to stay with his parents, along with Daniel. Later that evening, Guadi went to the house to retrieve the clothes he was wearing, and it was discovered that his mother had washed the clothes. Very convenient. On Thursday, March 2nd, 49-year-old Brown was brought in for questioning and detained for 12 hours. Reports indicate he was picked up from his parents' home. After initially agreeing to cooperate with the investigation, he refused to answer any of the questions asked. He was released that evening. Guadi told the press that they were conducting further inquiries and a file would be prepared for the Director of Public Prosecutions. The Guadi interviewed Siobhan's friends and family, and they discovered that Siobhan was unhappy in her marriage and had visited a solicitor weeks before she died. She had also contacted the Citizens Advice Bureau for advice on separation and dividing assets. The family also revealed that they were suspicious of Brian and that he was a controlling individual. They provided an example of Siobhan being made to take out the dishes from the dishwasher and being required to wash them by hand because it was too expensive to run the dishwasher. He controlled the money, and she had to get his approval for everything. Siobhan sold her apartment, and Brian moved them to Spain. One of the sisters would say it was his dream to move to Spain, not Siobhan's. Siobhan's life was in Ireland, and she had no one in Spain. It was his way of isolating her from her friends and family. There was also a growing rift between Brian and the McLaughlin family. Brian delayed the funeral by 10 days after asking for a second autopsy. When a death notice was published in the newspaper, the McLaughlin family referred to Siobhan as McLaughlin and not Carney, and never mentioned Brian. Meanwhile, they published a separate notice in a different newspaper. At the funeral on the 11th of March, a picture was placed beside the coffin of Siobhan and her son, but Brian was left out. Additionally, at the funeral, the Kearney and McLaughlin families sat separately in the church. They did not look at each other or interact on the day. This is characteristic of Irish people. We do not hesitate to express our genuine feelings about someone. The week after the funeral, the Garda traveled to Spain and conducted a search of the hotel that Siobhan and Brian owned. Furthermore, Brian's mobile data was recovered, and it placed him at the scene of the crime at the time they believed Siobhan died. Witnesses reported seeing Brian in the driveway at the time he claimed to be at his brother's on the morning of the murder. Brian's DNA was also found on a part of the vacuum cord. On June 22, 2006, Brian was arrested again and questioned at Dundrum Garda Station. He was questioned for 8 hours before being released without charge. The Garda felt they had enough evidence at this stage and sent a complete file with all the new evidence gathered over the months to the Director of Public Prosecutions, DPP. It was now a waiting game. Meanwhile, Brian went to Spain to oversee all the preparations for the hotel's new season opening. However, once word spread about the murder, cancellations started coming in, and staff also quit, considering it too difficult to work without Siobhan, who was the backbone of the business's success. The staff's loyalty was to Siobhan, not Brian, which reflects the kind of person Siobhan was. The Guadi again returned to the hotel in Spain, and under oath in front of a Spanish judge, the staff gave evidence about Siobhan's demeanor in the weeks before her death. On December 10, 2006, Siobhan's family held a vigil outside her house where she was killed. Her sister said, "We are utterly distraught without Siobhan, but we are equally determined and will not rest until her killer is brought to justice." Siobhan was the embodiment of fun, life, joy, a terrific mother, and an adorable and hilarious sister and daughter, a true friend, and she will never be forgotten. 200 people turned up at the vigil. They held hands, sang hymns, and held up pictures of Siobhan. In January 2007, the newspapers once again spoke to Guardi's sources, and they said they were confident that an arrest would be made soon. However, the amount of evidence was substantial, and it would take time to go through it. On Tuesday, the 17th of January 2007, the inquest into Siobhan's death was postponed. The McLaughlin family appealed to the public for fresh information to convict the main suspect, Brian, as the director of public prosecutions announced they needed even more evidence to go for a conviction of murder against Brian. Brian did not attend the short hearing. On May 30th, 2007, Kearney was arrested at his home next to his original home with his kids. He was charged with Siobhan's murder, brought to court, and remanded to prison. His response was not guilty, and no bail request was made. The McLaughlin family attended the hearing, but Kearney avoided eye contact and chewed gum, disrespectfully. Kearney was freed on bail on June 6, 2007, after appealing to the High Court at Clover Hill Prison the previous day. His release came with conditions. He had to surrender his passport, pay €100, and provide a €55,000 bond from an independent juror, which his brother Patrick supplied. He also had to sign in weekly at Dundrum Garda Station. In July, a date was set for the trial to begin 6 months later, with a 4-week timeframe to hear all evidence and reach a verdict. So the trial was to start in early 2008. On February 11th, Kearney appeared for trial before Justice Barry White and a jury of 12. He pleaded not guilty. However, one juror worked for a home security company that had installed and serviced the Kearney residence system. While the defense was willing to continue with 11 jurors, the prosecution objected and the judge agreed. The jury was dismissed and a new one sworn in a week later. It was the prosecution's case that Kearney had murdered Siobhan, tried to stage it as a suicide, and left his son alone before going to work. The McLaughlin family testified about the events, and Siobhan's father found her dead. Her mother also recounted the morning's happenings, including Neve's wrong actions towards the authorities and Kearney. She said when Kearney arrived home, she broke the news to him that Siobhan was dead upstairs. When she had been on the phone with him, she had not told him what was wrong, and Kearney never asked. Deja also confirmed that in 1999, Siobhan had signed herself into the St. John of God's psychiatric unit after suffering from stress at work and what was described as a little breakdown. But after 5 days, she returned to work. Bridget, Siobhan's sister, stated that in 2005, Kearney phoned her to say that Siobhan was suffering from her nerves again, but when Bridget phoned Siobhan, she was perfectly fine. Ward, who worked for Colors Electrical with Kearney, said Kearney was in the habit of arriving to work between 8:30 a.m. and 9 a.m., but on the morning of Siobhan's murder, he arrived extra early, between 7:50 a.m. and 8 a.m. A solicitor confirmed that multiple letters regarding the separation had been sent to Kearney, but he never responded to any of the correspondence. Kearney's statement to the guards was then read aloud. Kearney told the securities guards that on the morning of Siobhan's death, he had noticed her door was locked. The previous night, Siobhan and Daniel had returned home from a visit to her friend's house around 8:30 p.m., and Kearney had put Daniel to bed and slept in the same room, while Siobhan slept in the master bedroom. Kearney had said they woke up at 7 a.m. the next morning, had breakfast, and Kearney put on a DVD for Daniel, went upstairs to brush his teeth, and then attempted to enter Siobhan's room, but it was locked. He called out that he was leaving, went downstairs, kissed Daniel goodbye, and left for work. The court adjourned when a juror fell ill, but returned the next day. Evidence showed Siobhan couldn't have hanged herself. The pathologist found marks on her neck and chin, 3 larynx fractures, blood, and chin abrasions. She said the neck marks didn't come from hanging. Significant force was applied, and Siobhan was assaulted in bed, gripped by the neck, and a ligature used to hasten her death. The security guards reported no signs of forced entry, as the house's windows and doors were in good working condition. The alarm company confirmed that the system was activated at 10:50 p.m. the previous night, and then immediately deactivated. And it was reactivated at 7:37 a.m. the next morning, before being turned off again. A thorough search of the Kearney residence uncovered a diary in the airing cupboard, and the writing inside was confirmed to be Sabin's by her sister. Sabin's solicitor had advised her to maintain a diary documenting the events of her marriage to Kearney. Additionally, Sabin's passport was found wrapped in sheets and clothing in another area, and a €500 note was discovered in a drawer among wrapping paper. A financial forensic agent was next to take the stand. Kearney did own properties in Ireland and had a stake in the electrical business plus the hotel. But while he was asset-rich, he was cash-poor. On Monday, the 3rd of March, closing arguments began. The defense were first, and they said the prospect of splitting with Sabin did not suit Kearney financially. He wanted to sell one of the houses at Knocknashee, but if Sabin wanted to move into one of them, this would not be an option, and Kearney would have to work out his debt. In some other way, the fact that Sabin had started to squirrel away money, hide her passport, keep a diary of her relationship with Kearney, and send solicitor letters showed her seriousness about leaving him. Sabin was looking forward to her future and making plans, which showed that she was not suicidal. The evidence shown by forensics also showed that it was next to impossible that she had taken her own life. Kearney even admitted that he, Sabin, and their son had been the only ones present that night. The defense recommended caution, as the prosecution had shown no hard evidence, and it was all circumstantial evidence. They said the jury needed to pay attention to what was missing in the case. There was no history of violence, no custody dispute, no alcohol abuse or jealousy. The jury was asked to ignore the emotions of the McLaughlin family when they were giving evidence. It is known that there doesn't have to be outward signs of abuse, as it's the rabbit hole of a course of control, which the family would say there was plenty of. Sabin was strangled, and she had known Kearney since a very young age. There were no visible signs of physical violence, but there were extreme levels of control, like Kearney telling her to take the dirty dishes out of the dishwasher and hand wash them, because it would cost too much money. When Sabin finally said she was going to a solicitor, that's when Kearney couldn't cope, and he took her life. Coercive control is considered a form of domestic abuse, even if there is no physical violence. This is a growing issue that we are only now starting to address in the 2020s. On the 4th of March, Justice Barry White charged the jury and referred to the victim as Rachel rather than Sabin in his summing up, which was a terrible mistake. It so happened that at the same time, he was overseeing the case of Rachel O'Reilly, and he apologized. It wasn't the first or the last time that both women would be mentioned in each other's trial, as they both had died within 18 months of each other, under similar circumstances. The jury was discharged that evening, and the following evening, they came back with the verdict of guilty of murder by a majority verdict of 11-1. The McLaughlins wept and hugged each other as the verdict sunk in. Kearney made no reaction, but his daughter, who sat next to him, wept. And Kearney took his wedding ring off and took his wallet out and handed them to her. Kearney was sentenced to life there and then, and the McLaughlins asked to give a victim impact statement, but this was denied, which I don't understand why. Kearney was escorted to a van and brought to Whitfield Prison to start his sentence. Kearney lodged an appeal straight away, and it was heard in 2009, and the 3-judge panel dismissed the appeal. In 2012, Kearney was refused permission to bring his appeal to the Supreme Court. 7 years later, in 2019, Kearney's applications for parole were refused on 2 occasions. Kearney's sister told her local radio news network that the parole board had recommended Kearney for 2 outside prison visits with his family, suggesting they were preparing him for release. However, the parole board will only recommend his release if he admits his guilt, which he has never done. As of 2022, although the Minister for Justice has the final say on any release, Kearney remains incarcerated. In prison, Kearney is a trained counselor to help other inmates with their mental health and works for the organization The Samaritans. He is also trained in first aid. While in prison, he decided to sell the hotel in Spain, but then took it off the market in 2010. The hotel was then run by his brother Patrick and his wife, and it is still open, although it may be under new ownership since then. Kearney said he wanted to keep the hotel in order to facilitate his son's education. The McLaughlin family sought to adopt Daniel, but it's unclear whether they did or how he is doing, which is good, as he deserves some peace, as does his half-sister Aisling. A family with 3 children lived in the house where Siobhan was murdered, but it was up for sale for €1.4 million back in 2008. It's presumed that it has been sold since then. Kearney's daughter did live in the new house while he was still a free man, but there have been no updates on her either. If Kearney decided to sell off all his assets and pay off his debts, he will have a significant amount of money when he gets out, and he may even become a millionaire. The family were considering suing him for Siobhan's chair at least, if not all, but there are no public details on this. Siobhan's sister Aisling released a statement after Kearney's conviction, saying that while their lives were utterly destroyed by Siobhan's death, Siobhan had now got justice. They are grateful to have known and had someone as special as Shawnee in their lives, which was their nickname for her. However, they miss her every hour of every day, and the unbearable longing to see her and protect her never leaves them, even though they know it's too late. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Alicia Ross. A young Canadian woman named Alicia Ross vanished without a trace from her own bedroom in the middle of the night. The police were unable to find either a body or any significant evidence, and as a result, the investigation merely stagnated. The case might have remained unsolved had the criminal not turned himself in to the police. Alicia Ross was born on February 8, 1980, in the Canadian city of Markham, in the province of Ontario. There is no information about her biological parents, but it is known that they gave up their rights to the child, and she was adopted at a few months old by a couple named Marvin and Sharon Ross. Her adoptive parents provided her with love and care, and they did everything to ensure that their daughter had everything she needed and could fully develop her talents. When Alicia started school, her adoptive parents decided to divorce, but they maintained a friendly relationship and continued to participate together in their daughter's life. Soon, Sharon remarried, and her new husband, named Julius Forrest, treated the child as if she were his own daughter. The girl performed well in school, demonstrated exceptional skills in drawing, and also developed a passion for photography and a love for discovering new cities and countries. After finishing school, she spent a year in Australia, where she traveled and enjoyed life before returning home and enrolling in university in the summer of 2005. The 25-year-old Alicia went on a hiking trip in the mountains with her friends, where she met a young man named Sean, with whom she began a romantic relationship in early July. He was 4 years older than her, but the small age difference did not bother the couple. On August 16th, the young woman, along with her adoptive mother and their dogs, went for a stroll in the park. Alicia appeared cheerful and shared that she was expecting a promotion at work to the position of senior sales manager in the coming days. She was very proud, as she had been working hard for a long time, and her efforts were about to be rewarded. Additionally, the young woman discussed her boyfriend, Sean, whom she had been dating for just over a month, but seemed deeply in love with. Alicia hoped that this romance could grow into something more meaningful in the future, and expressed a desire to introduce her new boyfriend to her adoptive parents by arranging a family dinner. After her walk in the park, the mother returned home, and her daughter went on a date with her sweetheart. She promised not to be gone long, as she had to get up early for work the next day, where her promotion was to be decided. The women said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. Sharon never saw her daughter alive again. The mysterious disappearance of her own house that night, after meeting with Sean, is what led to the unsolved case. Alicia invited him to her house, and they had a great time together. Around midnight, the young man went home, and Alicia accompanied him to the door, which served as a second exit from the backyard. They said goodbye with a kiss, and he left, promising to call her as soon as he got home. Around midnight, as promised, Sean called his girlfriend, but she didn't answer the phone. He wasn't overly concerned, thinking Alicia had simply fallen asleep since she had to get up early for work. However, the next morning, when he tried to call her again and she still didn't pick up, he became genuinely worried and contacted a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same office as Alicia. From her, he learned that Alicia hadn't come to work, and he immediately rushed to her house. On August 17th in the morning, Sharon and Julius planned to play golf with friends and left the house at 10. They saw their daughter's car in the driveway, but assumed someone had taken her, so they went about their day. A while later, Sean went to Alicia's house but couldn't find her, so he called the police to report her missing. He then called Sharon to inform her. The couple rushed home, where the police were already there. Sean was the first to notice Alicia was missing and inform the police. He was also the last to see her the night before she disappeared, saying they had parted ways at the gate around midnight and hadn't heard from her since. When Sharon and Julius approached the house, law enforcement was already there, inspecting the area and speaking with Sean, who had called them. The young man appeared visibly nervous and distraught. When the mother looked into Alicia's room, she immediately noticed that all her daughter's personal belongings, which she never left the house without, were in their places. Her purse, passport, driver's license, keys, cell phone, as well as her bank cards and cash, were all left in the room, suggesting she wouldn't have gone anywhere, let alone left without them. The gate was open but not forced, implying that the missing person either let her abductor in or willingly left with someone from the yard. In the backyard, the police found some disturbance. The lawn and flowers in one area were trampled, as if someone had fallen there. Also, a pair of cigarettes and the right sandal of the girl, the one she had been wearing the evening before, were found on the ground, laid out in a straight line. Neither Alicia nor her parents smoked, so the cigarettes did not belong to them, and Sean claimed he never smoked that particular brand, leaving the ownership and arrangement of the cigarettes unclear. Sean was almost immediately considered the prime suspect. Firstly, he was noticeably nervous, and his account seemed somewhat confused and disjointed. Secondly, he was the first to report his girlfriend's disappearance to the police, even before speaking with her parents and confirming that they too had not seen her. Thus, he definitely knew she was missing. Additionally, law enforcement found biological traces on the girl's bed belonging both to her and Sean. Based on this, the investigation speculated that Alicia might have denied Sean intimacy, and he decided to force her, then trying to cover his tracks, staged her disappearance, which he likely caused by ending her life. When Sean was brought to the police station, questioned, and the investigators' theory presented to him, the young man was shocked. He was distressed to be considered the primary suspect and swore he would never harm his girlfriend, as he loved her. He also acknowledged that they did indeed have intimate moments that evening, but insisted it was consensual. The missing girl's parents also had nothing negative to say about Sean. He had not argued with their daughter, had not mistreated her, and she spoke only positively of him. Their relationship was developing quickly and quite happily, to the extent that Alicia even hoped to have a future with him. Moreover, the parents noted that their daughter had no plans or reasons to leave. She was eagerly awaiting a promotion at her beloved job, and being a responsible person, she would never just leave everything behind. But even if some unforeseen circumstances had arisen, she would certainly have informed her parents and definitely would not have left without her documents, money, and phone. The police lacked sufficient evidence or grounds to detain Sean, and so, after questioning him at the station, they released him. Nevertheless, law enforcement did not rule him out as a suspect and continued to monitor the young man. Sean himself appeared dejected and highly distressed. The extensive search effort for the missing woman began the day after her disappearance. Initially, a thorough inspection of the home and yard was conducted, and investigators closely examined the surrounding area and interviewed neighbors. However, no one reported hearing or seeing anything suspicious that night. Law enforcement theorized that the woman disappeared sometime between midnight, when she said goodbye to Sean, and sunrise, a time when the streets are usually quiet and deserted, making it challenging to find witnesses. Alicia's photos were distributed as flyers throughout the city, providing phone numbers for people to report any information about her whereabouts. The story of the missing woman was widely covered in the news and featured in popular publications, sparking significant public interest and prompting hundreds of volunteers and concerned citizens to join the search. The police received numerous daily calls related to the case, although most of the information turned out to be false or mistaken. Nevertheless, each tip and theory was investigated in the hope of finding any leads. The search area was continuously expanded, involving more people. Thorough checks were conducted in abandoned buildings, wooded areas, and wastelands. Sean also actively participated in the search efforts, despite still being the prime suspect. Feeling wronged, the young man turned to the media and gave a significant interview where he expressed his deep love for Alicia and showed photos of them looking very happy together. He tearfully pleaded for help in the search, appearing utterly devastated by the situation. The search for Alicia became one of the most extensive operations in Ontario's history. Every difficult-to-reach ravine and marshy area was scoured, but no clues, leads, or even hints about the missing woman's location were found. Her parents also appealed to the public through the media, expressing their belief that their daughter was alive but being held against her will somewhere. They implored whoever had their daughter to let her return home unharmed and not to harm her in any way. Sean's unexpected arrest led the police to lean towards the theory that someone Alicia knew personally had abducted and possibly ended her life. This hypothesis was supported by the lack of signs of struggle, no evidence of forced entry, and the gate being left open, but no concrete leads were found. The cigarettes found on the ground bore only a heavily smeared fingerprint, which couldn't be identified. Investigators thoroughly checked Alicia's contacts and reviewed all calls and messages on her phone and email, yet nothing suspicious was uncovered. On the 6th day of the search, the case was officially reclassified as a criminal act, despite the lack of evidence. Sean remained the prime suspect. Sean lived alone in his own house, located about 10 miles from Alicia's home. After realizing that public suspicion had intensified following his media appearance, he stopped participating in the search and refused to speak with the press. Investigators interviewed Sean 3 more times, but his story remained consistent. He was then offered a lie detector test, which he refused, convincing the police even more firmly that he was involved in the crime. 2 weeks after the disappearance, Sean was arrested on an unrelated charge. He was taken into custody late at night for driving under the influence and resisting arrest. Speculations arose that he was attempting to drown his guilt in alcohol. Following Sean's arrest, Alicia's parents gave another interview, sharing that they had not personally known the young man and only knew about him through their daughter's accounts. They believed she was happy, but now they considered the possibility that their daughter might have withheld certain details to avoid upsetting them, though she had planned to introduce her boyfriend to her family soon. Police interviewed Sean's neighbors to determine if they had noticed anything unusual recently, such as him disposing of large trash bags, behaving suspiciously, leaving unexpectedly, or cleaning his car. However, no significant information emerged from these inquiries. Detectives were left hoping that Sean might eventually confess to everything. About a month after Alicia's disappearance, the media attention surrounding her case began to fade. The search continued, but it was no longer prominently featured in newspapers or news broadcasts, and the investigation seemed to have reached a dead end. The only option left for law enforcement was to keep pressuring Sean, hoping he would eventually confess to the crime. Then, a completely unexpected development occurred in the case on September 20, 2005, more than a month after Alicia's disappearance. 31-year-old Daniel Sylvester, a local resident, called the police and confessed to ending the girl's life, revealing where he had hidden her body. It's important to note that this man had not been under suspicion previously, and the police had not considered him at all during their initial investigation. At first, it appeared that the man merely sought fame and attention, and had decided to take responsibility for the most notorious case in recent years. However, all doubts were dispelled when the police discovered the girl's body at the location he had specified. Daniel Sylvester was an unemployed recluse who lived in his mother's house, which was adjacent to the Ross family home. The two properties were separated by overgrown shrubs, creating a nearly impenetrable barrier. Despite living virtually side by side for their entire lives, Daniel and the victims had never interacted before. Alicia had seen Daniel on his property a few times and considered him mentally unwell due to his strange behavior. The police had not shown an interest in Daniel earlier, as he seemed to be a reclusive and isolated individual who had not drawn attention to himself. Daniel had significant social challenges from a young age. He struggled to make friends, was ridiculed at school, and every effort to form relationships ended in complete failure, leading him to develop a deep resentment towards women. As a child, girls would call him a loser and say they would never associate with someone like him. At age 8, Sylvester was diagnosed with a social behavioral disorder and had been under ongoing psychological treatment, but the therapy did not provide much improvement. In his teenage years, he confessed that he had fantasies of suddenly attacking and overpowering a girl, which excited him. However, specialists were confident that these fantasies would remain just that, and not manifest into real actions. After finishing school, Daniel stopped attending therapy sessions, decided not to continue his education, and became a recluse. He lived in his mother's house, isolating himself from the outside world, spending his days sitting in his room, often on adult websites, and occasionally venturing out in the evenings to secretly watch his neighbors, peeping into their windows. He particularly enjoyed watching when someone was engaged in sexual activity, as this spectacle excited him, yet Daniel remained a virgin well into his 30s, satisfying his desires through solitary activities. The neighbors hardly ever saw him, and thus considered him a harmless guy. Initially, Sylvester claimed that the girl's death was accidental, and he hid the body to avoid punishment. According to him, when he realized the girl showed no signs of life, he placed her in the trunk of his mother's car and drove about 50 miles out of town, hiding the body in a bushy ravine by the side of a country road. 3 weeks later, fearing that the body would be discovered, he moved it in the middle of the night, even further away, to a deserted area. The body was found in the place Daniel indicated, thereby dispelling the last doubts about his guilt. However, the condition of the remains indicated that the girl had been dealt with extreme cruelty. The injuries were such that it looked as if she had been hit by a car. An autopsy showed that Alicia had nearly all her ribs broken, her neck and both arms, and also suffered extensive closed cranial trauma with internal bleeding. The exact cause of death could not be determined, but at least 3 injuries were incompatible with life. Forensic experts were shocked, as they had never encountered anything like it before. It was necessary to clarify the circumstances and chronology of events on that fateful evening to determine how exactly the girl received her injuries. The convict initially claimed that he had an argument with his neighbor on a bush-covered path between their homes. During the verbal altercation, the neighbor called him a loser, which angered him, and he struck her on the head. When she fell, he kicked her several times in the chest. Realizing she was not breathing, he decided to hide the body and then moved it again when the search area expanded. However, there were missing details and specifics in his story that did not add up. It was unclear what Daniel was doing at his neighbor's house at night, why they began arguing, and what caused such a brutal beating. The evidence found at the scene was laid out in a straight line, making it challenging to reconstruct the full sequence of events. The investigation revealed that Sylvester had gone out to observe his neighbors. He noticed that Alicia's boyfriend had come over, and he approached their house closely as the couple was being intimate. He watched them from a window, then moved back to the bushes but did not leave. As midnight approached, the lovers went outside and kissed by the gate, just a couple of feet away from the observing neighbor. When Sean left, the girl returned to the yard and noticed Daniel. She became very angry, realizing that he had been spying on her and her boyfriend all this time. She started yelling at him, calling him a pervert and demanding that he leave immediately. Finally, Alicia called him a loser, which acted as a trigger for Sylvester, as that was exactly what other girls had called him during his childhood. Filled with rage, Sylvester punched the girl forcefully on the head and knocked her to the ground. She tried to resist and grabbed her attacker's hair, but he began to choke her. When his grip loosened, Daniel quickly stood up and began kicking Alicia while she was lying down, primarily striking her chest, back, neck, and head. Forensic experts later counted 33 fractures on the victim's body and extensive internal bleeding. When the man realized his neighbor was dead, he moved her body to his garage, undressed her, and then masturbated to relieve the tension, according to his testimony. The examination confirmed that Sylvester did not violate the body. He then placed the corpse in the trunk of his mother's car and took it to a remote location outside the city. Upon returning home, the criminal took a shower, changed clothes, and behaved as if nothing had happened. His clothes, the victim's belongings, and the towels he used to clean the crime scene were packed in trash bags and disposed of. The trial and sentencing proceedings began only in April 2007, at which time new details were made public. The defendant confessed that he had ended his neighbor's life, but he and his lawyer insisted that it was unintentional. The defense demanded a psychiatric evaluation, arguing that Daniel was mentally ill and should not be held accountable for his actions, suggesting he be treated in a clinic instead of being incarcerated. However, the prosecution argued that despite his mental illness and anger management issues, Sylvester acted with full knowledge of the consequences of his actions. He kicked the girl mercilessly with all his might, knowing it would likely result in her death. Nevertheless, the court-ordered psychiatric evaluation confirmed that the defendant could indeed be considered fully responsible for his actions. Regarding the items found in the backyard, Daniel never admitted to having placed them there, arranged in a straight line. On May 7, 2007, the defendant was found guilty of a second-degree crime and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 16 years. A year later, Canadian singer-songwriter Kathleen Edwards wrote a song titled Alicia Ross, which portrayed the events from the young woman's perspective during the final moments of her life.